To this witness, defense, you stated that you want to have a hearing as it relates to the voluntariness of statements that your client may have made.
Yes, please, Judge. So that carries on from the record that my colleague established yesterday.
All right, you may proceed, and you're still under oath. And if, just so the record can be clear, if you'll restate your name, please.
Bianca Martinez.
All right, defense.
Thank you. Sergeant Martinez, how are you doing?
I'm well, how are you, sir?
Good, I'm good, thank you, thank you. I've got a couple of questions to ask you about your involvement in this incident, obviously. They're no trick questions. If you want me to repeat myself, I will. Okay. So it'd be fair to say, I think you already established that the call came in for this incident at around 2-ish in the morning, 2 a.m.-ish, probably 2:20. Yes.
2:30-ish, yes, sir.
And the way it normally works is that you're requested probably by a patrol officer through a supervisor, and they ask for TID because it's a serious injury or possibly death, crash.
The patrol officers call us directly.
They call directly,
Mhm.
right? And so someone, we know, because we've had testimony for the last few days, Officer Morgan, I think, can you treat yourself?
I'm sorry?
Officer Morgan spoke to someone from TID, I'm not sure if it was you.
He spoke to me.
So Officer Morgan spoke to you, and I believe that for whatever reason or another, you were at a central scene at one crash in central sector, right?
You're asking if we were at a scene?
Yes.
Yes,
And you were supposed to get a call back from Officer Morgan or someone on from this incident,
correct,
and that didn't happen.
correct.
And we're not going to go into that why now, but it just didn't happen. And it'd be fair to say, so that happened at 2:20 a.m.
Well, the crash was at roughly 2:20 a.m.
Yeah, so the crash was roughly at 2:20 a.m. And officers were there fairly quickly because they're at another scene nearby.
Yes,
And some things were missed, and there was some miscommunication, and you didn't find out again until you, doing your due diligence, checked your computer around 5 a.m. when you went back to the central office, right?
so public safety headquarters, yes, sir.
Yeah, so
Sorry.
we can't talk over each other because we can't make a reference. So you went back to public safety headquarters and you checked, what message system is it?
It's our call screen. So we have a system for, they're called call for service. So CFSs, I check the call screen. So it would be an active call on the call screen. When I select that call, it shows me all of the updates that are happening throughout the call. And one of the updates was that TID was notified and we were, basically, they were awaiting us at the scene.
And so the first thing you did, I guess, is you went to the scene.
I informed my supervisor, because that was obviously an issue.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, we loaded up and went directly to the scene.
I mean, it's an issue for a couple of reasons, right?
For a lot of reasons, yes, sir.
For a lot of reasons. I mean, like, you're a patrol supervisor now, so you know what the reasons are, right? Because we're not challenging your training experience. You've done a lot of training experience and knowledge about the penal code, case law, right? The Fourth Amendment and things like that, right?
Yeah, I've had the training that I had at the academy, yes, sir.
Yeah, and so what we know is that everybody at that scene is still there, waiting for you guys to arrive.
Yes, sir.
And so you were equipped with a body camera that day.
Yes, sir.
And obviously you abide by all the rules of the department, don't you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm sure you do, because now you enforce it with your patrol folks, right? And one of those rules is when you turn up at the scene, you have to activate body cameras as soon as you get there. What's the rules with that?
So those same rules don't apply to me as an investigator.
But you still, you activated the body camera.
When I was speaking to the people involved in the crash, yes, I had it activated.
So when you get to the scene, you activate your camera sometimes. Do you know what time you made the crash?
I believe we got there possibly around 5:30 a.m., somewhere around that time.
And so I believe what you said earlier is that, and your practice, your job was you were the primary, right, for TID, is that right?
I was the handling detective on this case.
So you were the handling detective. And there are other detectives with you, right?
Yes, sir.
And there are other uniformed folks on the scene.
Patrol officers as well as uniformed detectives. I believe there was a uniformed patrol supervisor out at the scene.
And and did your supervisor come with you, Sergeant Johnson?
Yes, sir.
And so you go to the scene, and I guess your first thing is what do you do when you first get there?
We walk the scene, so it's just our phrase for basically starting at what appears to be the beginning of the crash scene, and we walk to the end, where typically where the vehicles are stopped.
Right, and what other information have you been given about the parties and the people involved?
Minimal at this point.
So, when you get there, do you recall anything on the scene? Not officers, drivers.
I saw people that were waiting along the concrete barrier wall, along the Jersey wall.
Okay, that's called the Jersey Wall, is that the correct thing?
It's a term that it can be referred to as that.
All right, would it be fair to say there's 3 drivers there?
Yeah.
Were there 3 drivers there still?
Yes, I saw 3 males.
3 now. And you spoke to them all,
I did.
right? And at that point, have you spoken to Officer Morgan?
If I did, it was brief. I believe I spoke with Officer Morgan after I spoke to all of the drivers.
Right, okay. And then at some point, yeah, you spoke to, because obviously you're here for Mr. Castro, right?
I'm sorry?
We're here for Alexander Castro, right? You spoke to Mr. Castro, okay,
Yes, sir.
right? And you spoke to him and you asked him or you conducted a horizontal gaze and Sagan's test on him.
I checked his eyes.
Well, okay, well, maybe you didn't do, well, that's a good point. So you didn't do a full test on him, you just did a cursory check of his eyes.
Correct.
And then at that point, you didn't let him go.
I did not release him, no.
He's not free to leave.
We were still conducting our investigation.
I know, so it's a yes or a no. He's not free to leave at that point, is he?
I had not dismissed him yet, no, sir.
Because if he'd have run off, someone would have stopped him.
Yes,
And
I'd imagine, yeah, somebody would
Yeah, I know.
ask him at least where he's going.
Yeah, and you know, we've spoken to other officers, and in fact, that you may or may not be aware that he had testimony that his wife had arrived on scene. At some point earlier, he'd asked to go and see her. Right, and he was told he couldn't.
I wasn't aware of that.
And that he'd asked to leave and he was told he couldn't.
I also wasn't aware of that.
And he asked to go to the bathroom and they wouldn't let him go to the bathroom. They did eventually, but they wouldn't let him go and relieve himself somewhere else at the time. They wouldn't let him go and do that.
From watching the body cam, I do recall that he had to use the bathroom twice and they did allow him to go on the highway.
On the highway, exactly, in public, you know, so he wasn't allowed to go somewhere else and go in private. He wasn't allowed to go home and go to the bathroom. So at this point, you're still holding him there, right?
The officers are awaiting our arrival
Okay.
to speak with all the drivers.
Before you get there, you go and speak to all the drivers, but you speak to Mr. Castro, then you check his eyes, right?
Yes.
But you don't arrest him?
No.
Did you speak to the other drivers as well?
Yes,
Did you check any of their eyes?
no,
And then you asked a detective, Auto. You asked him to go and check Mr. Castro's eyes as well.
yes, Detective Orta is one of our DREs on the unit. So I asked him to evaluate Mr. Castro.
And he did, and that's because at this point, you know, pretty soon after you've arrived, within like 20 minutes, Mr. Castro is the target of your investigation.
I'm not too sure if that's how long it took for me to speak with all the drivers.
Yeah, so I'm not asking you to, but it was fairly soon, he's become the target of your investigation.
I wouldn't phrase it like that.
All right, well, let me rephrase it, because you can read one of these things, right? And you're presented with a scene with however many vehicles. It didn't take you long to identify that Mr. Castro may have been at fault in your opinion, right?
It didn't take me long to know that he was what we consider a bullet vehicle.
Bullet vehicle, right. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but the bullet vehicle in crash reconstruction parlance is a bullet and a target vehicle, right?
Yes, sir.
The bullet vehicle's like the bullet that's been shot out the gun that causes the collision.
It's what starts the crash in
So you've
motion.
identified him as being the person who started this, right?
Yes, sir.
Because at that point, you've already made, within 20 minutes, you made a decision to arrest him, right?
No, sir.
You hadn't made a decision to arrest him?
No, sir.
Okay. And you didn't arrest him?
I did not.
No, and you went and spoke to him a couple of times?
Yes, sir.
You asked him some questions?
Yes, sir.
But at this point, you've got probable cause to arrest him?
I didn't believe that I did, because if I had probable cause to arrest him, I would have.
And what else, if you had probable cause, what would you have done?
Arrested him.
Okay, and then what would you have done before you spoke to him again?
Oh, if I had any further questions, I would have read him his rights.
You'd have read him his rights, because what would it mean if you had probable cause and didn't read him his rights and then asked him questions? What would that mean to the result of those questions?
Oh, I'm not too sure how to answer that.
They'd be inadmissible, right? You have to say yes or no, sorry.
I'd imagine, I'm not an attorney, sir.
No, but you've got knowledge of the penal code,
I do, sir.
right, and you've had training in this, so you'd agree with me that it would be wrong for you to have probable cause to arrest somebody, and then and if you don't arrest them, to question them without warning them, right, that'd be wrong.
Yes, sir. I do understand that if we place someone under arrest, we have to read them their Miranda rights.
Right, and of course, if you can also, you're probably aware about that, even if you don't place someone under arrest and you suspect that you've got probable cause to arrest them, you can still speak to them if you read them their rights.
I understand that, but I did not have probable cause to arrest him.
Okay, and then you spoke to him a couple of times, him being Mr. Castro,
Yes.
right? You didn't arrest him,
No, sir.
you did his eyes, you didn't arrest him, you didn't warn him.
Yes, sir.
Spoke to some of your colleagues for a little while, right? Spoke to Sergeant Johnson, some of the other guys, Detective Doyle. Then you went back to speak to Mr. Castro again. And you asked him, each time you went to him, you basically asked him some questions along the lines of, about investigation questions, like, hey, what happened, man? Right? And then you get onto normal crash investigation questions, such as, like, have you been drinking? Right? Remember asking if he'd been drinking?
I do.
Consuming alcohol. And you remember him answering that he'd consumed alcohol?
Yes, sir.
So you elicited those questions from him, right?
Yes, sir.
And then at that point, you don't have probable cause to arrest him,
No, sir.
but you develop probable cause, right?
I didn't develop probable cause that evening. No, sir.
And you hadn't decided to arrest him at all,
No, sir.
but yet you continue to speak to him.
Yes, sir. I was conducting my investigation.
And you didn't warn him,
No, sir.
and you didn't arrest him.
No, sir.
And then you got and where is the and then at some point you got Mr. Castro, he signed a consent to search, right?
Yes, sir. So I can download his airbag control module.
I'm gonna get the top of it, Sergeant. Give me, I'm sorry, Judge, can I have a second to get
Mhm.
that on the document? Sergeant, I've got a lot of papers here, I do apologise, I will find it. Here it is, right, okay, yeah. Judge, for the purposes here, I'm gonna mark this document as defense 4. Can I approach Judge?
Yes.
Judge, and at this point, the state's gonna ask, I thought we were here for the voluntariness of the state, it's not the consent to search. I think those are two separate issues that we're now going into.
All right, you can proceed, defense.
Thank you, Judge. Hey, Sergeant, I can show you that. Where am I supposed to be looking on here? You recognize any of this?
Yes, sir.
What is it?
It's the department's form for a consent to search.
And this is, look, it is what it is. This is a consent to search that you asked Mr. Castro to sign,
Yes, sir.
right? And it's got Officer Lechuga's signature on it, right?
As the witnesses, yes, sir.
Yeah, and it's got Mr. Castro's name on it. Whose handwriting is that?
That's my handwriting.
That's your handwriting.
I filled out the form.
Okay, all right, thank you, Sergeant, I appreciate that. I'm going to show it to counsel and offer, for the purpose of this hearing, defence 4. And I think, Detective, sorry, does it say on there what time it was signed?
Yeah, I'm sorry, what's it in?
Yes, it is. A judge offered defence 4.
Admitted for purposes of this hearing.
Sergeant, does it say what time it was signed? Doesn't, does it? Or does it?
No, it just appears to have the date.
Okay, thank you. So, I'll leave that with you for a second, but but you were in a body camera that day, right? And yeah,
Yes, sir.
it would help you refresh your memory with regards to, what time that was signed to watch body camera, so. About that.
Oh, yeah, I could play it.
All right, so time out, everybody approach.
Sergeant, very briefly, before we go any further, so I've asked you a lot of questions. Would you have any reason to doubt me if I told you you turned your body camera on at about 5:45 and 20 seconds?
No, that sounds about right.
Would you have any reason to doubt me that around 6:04:25 you were speaking to Sergeant Johnson?
I believe I spoke with him after I spoke with all the drivers, so
And you've already
Yes.
spoken to Mr. Castro by then, right?
yes, I should have.
And do you remember saying to Sergeant Johnson, manslaughter, everybody's getting charged, everybody's going to jail, everybody's getting charged.
I do recall that, but it's taken out of context.
Okay, what you do is very serious, right?
Yes, sir.
It's not, there's no room for mistakes,
No, sir.
and you don't joke about your work.
Unfortunately, we have to.
No, I get that, you probably do, because you deal with dark things, right, it's sad, but.
The things I've seen, you've only seen in horror films.
Yeah, I bet, and, so then you spoke to Sergeant Johnson, and then you continue the conversation, and then you recall saying to him, no, it don't even matter. Even if you have a reason not to do it, just charge them, we'll deal with it later, manslaughter, everyone is going to jail.
I do recall saying that, but I did not arrest Mr. Castro that evening.
You did not, and you said that, though, you're agreeing with me that that's what you said.
I do recall saying those things, yes.
And at this point, the only person who is the subject of your investigation that you're looking at criminally is Mr. Castro.
Out of the other drivers that were there, yes, sir.
Yeah, so when you're talking about manslaughter, everyone's going to jail, even if you have a reason to do it, just charge them with it, you're talking about Mr. Castro.
Like I said, sir, it's being taken out of context.
But you did say that,
I do recall saying that, yes, sir.
okay? And you also said manslaughter, everyone's getting charged, everyone's going to jail.
It's a generic statement. It's not in reference to Mr. Castro.
But you continue, so you're talking, what, okay, well, let's talk about that then. So it's a generic statement and it's not about Mr. Castro. What's that about then?
Unfortunately, it is a joke. It was a joke that we had at the unit because my supervisor at the time, Mr. Tommy Johnson, he felt that if we were at crash scenes, it was for a reason. We only go to the most severe crash scenes. And he felt that most, if not all of them, are criminal in nature.
Okay, well, that's what Tommy Johnson thinks. Tommy Johnson retired, right?
Yes.
I'm asking you about you. Is your testimony to this court that this is a joke?
Not that the case is a joke, but my statements out at the scene to Sergeant Johnson at the time were what we considered an inside joke at the unit.
That's an inside joke at the unit.
It was when I was on the unit, yes, sir.
But, okay, well, let's put it in a different context then. You would agree with me that those words coming out of your mouth, manslaughter, I don't care what happened, everyone's getting charged, is you kind of saying, I've already made a decision to arrest somebody.
No, sir, I hadn't made a decision to arrest Mr. Castro. Otherwise, I would have that evening.
Well, I know, but that's not what I'm saying. I'm asking you about these words because we've got to get, this is, I mean, Sergeant, this is important, right?
Yes,
For
sir.
everybody involved, this is important. And I'm sorry, but you're not denying that you say these words.
I'm not.
Okay, but your testimony to this court is that was a joke.
Yes, sir.
Despite everything that you saw at the scene, the physical evidence of that Detective Doyle said, you know, through his training and your training experience, you can see it's obviously there's a huge debris field. Vehicles are driving at a high rate of speed. You've already determined through talking to your colleagues, and do you remember Tommy Johnson saying to you, here's my problem. There's a clear line of sight and this guy comes plowing through these cars and they're all stopped.
Yes, sir.
And that's why you said manslaughter. Everybody's getting charged. Can we just play the video real quick?
Why do we need to play the video?
Because
I've already heard what the statements are. Could we please get to what statements that the defense finds objectionable that the defense is saying was not voluntary.
So your testimony is that this is a joke and that's not you manifesting your.
I'm gonna
probable
object to
cause.
asked and answered.
Sustained.
So you're not manifesting your probable cause to arrest in that statement.
No, sir.
It's a joke.
Yes, sir.
Right, okay, so despite these jokes about everyone getting charged with manslaughter and going to jail, you go and speak to Mr. Castro again.
I believe I did speak with him after speaking with Sergeant Johnson.
At 6:06:41, would it help you to watch a video?
No, sir.
It wouldn't. Okay, then, well, at 6:06:41, would you have any reason to believe that, that this, like, doubt that you went, if I told you you went to speak to him, would you disagree with that?
No, sir.
And then you said to him, explain to me what happened. Then you have a conversation about what happened.
Yes, sir.
And he explains to you what happened in the wreck, his version of events,
Yes.
okay? And then you walk away and then you go and speak to him again at 6:09. At the end of having spoken to him, you didn't arrest him.
Correct.
You didn't warn him,
No, sir. I did not read anyone the Miranda rights.
but he's not free to leave.
I was still conducting my investigation, so no.
That's not right, okay. And then you went back to him again and you asked him what's going on. And you asked him how fast he was going. Remember that?
Yes, sir.
And he said maybe about 75. Right?
Yes, sir.
And then you asked him if he'd been drinking at all.
Yes, sir.
And at this point, you're still saying that you don't have probable cause to arrest him,
Correct.
despite the jokes about everyone getting arrested for manslaughter.
Correct. That joke was used at many other crash scenes. Like I said, it was an inside joke at the unit.
So that's a joke. And so you then, despite all these jokes and you not having probable cause, you then ask him if he's been drinking.
Yes, sir.
And he says what time he's been drinking,
Yes, sir.
right? And how much he's been drinking,
Yes.
okay? And then you're with him for 4 minutes questioning him. Right, and at 6:10:51, you do the horizontal gaze and statements, eye test.
Well, I checked his eyes.
You checked his eyes, right, thank you. And you still didn't arrest him,
No, sir.
still didn't warn him. Kept questioning him,
Yes, sir.
and you asked him how many drinks he had, and he told you about 4 beers.
Yes, sir.
But you kept talking to him,
Yes.
didn't arrest him.
It's not illegal to drink and drive, sir. It's illegal to be intoxicated.
All right,
and
so
drive.
everyone. We're gonna wait. A question is going to be asked, an answer will be given. And then after the answer is given, a question will be asked. There will be no sidebar, none of these side conversations. It makes it difficult for the court reporter to take it down. So any other questions, defense?
Very brief, Judge. So you speak to him, you go and speak to Sergeant Johnson again, and you still don't arrest him. You have a conversation with Sergeant Johnson.
Correct.
Then you go away and then you do some other work, and then at 6:40 again, you go back and speak to Mr. Castro. And at 6:40 is the Zulu time on your body camera.
Okay.
He's still not free to leave,
Not if I was still speaking to him about the crash.
and it's 4 hours and 20 minutes after the incident.
At 6:40 something, yes, it would have been 4 hours and 20 minutes past.
Not arrested,
No, sir, wasn't arrested.
and he's not warned.
No, I didn't read anyone the Miranda rights. I've said that like 3 times.
I know, but exactly, but each time you go back to him, you don't ask him, and then at 6:42, you ask him to consent to the vehicle download.
Correct, so I can download his airbag control module.
And then once he's done that, you let him go.
Yes, sir.
I've got no further questions.
Question?
Sergeant Martinez, did you ever condition him signing the consent to search or make any conditions on him signing that? What I mean by that, did you say, once you sign this, or if you sign this, I can let you go?
No, sir.
Did you threaten to arrest him?
No, sir.
Was Mr. Castro ever placed in handcuffs?
No, sir.
Was he put in the back of the squad car?
To my knowledge, no, sir.
And once you were done with his part of the investigation, you let him go, didn't you?
Correct, he was free to leave.
And he gave verbal consent to search the airbag control module before you had him sign the paperwork.
Yes, sir.
And did you ever threaten him?
No, sir.
Did you have your gun out threatening to harm him if he didn't sign?
No, sir.
Do you recall what he said when you asked?
I believe he said that he did not have a problem with it.
So he gave you verbal consent and then you asked if he would then sign the form to make sure that it was in a written form too.
Correct.
So at that point, again, you're only holding him just because he gave you consent, but you're then just asking him just to sign the form before, just to make it official.
Yes, sir. After he verbally consented, I had to obviously go grab the form and fill it out and then have him sign.
And then going back to the original questions that you asked, at any point leading up to that, was he in handcuffs?
No, sir.
At any point, did you put him in the back of the squad car?
No, sir.
And other than the alcohol question, was it the same questions you asked every other person?
Yes, sir.
Why did you ask the alcohol question?
Because I could smell alcohol in his breath.
And you were just conducting your investigation at that point then?
Yes, sir.
And again, like to tell the other drivers, once we were finished with your questions, he was free to go.
Yes, sir.
Nothing more from the state.
All right, any other questions?
Briefly, Judge. Sergeant, you know that in the state of Texas, just handcuffing someone's not the only way that you can arrest someone, right?
I understand that.
Put it in the back of the police vehicle is not the only way that you can arrest them, right?
I'm gonna object to legal conclusions.
I thought it'd be overruled.
Can you re-ask the question?
I think you don't have to tell somebody you're under arrest for them to be under arrest, do you?
Technically, no.
Technically, no, it might be a good idea, but technically, no, right?
Correct.
We agree on that. So that there's like, and most of it, and it's not really in the penal code, right?
What's not in the penal code?
Well, you know, how to arrest somebody.
No.
And so that's based on case law.
Case law and our code of criminal procedures, yes, sir.
Yeah, and it doesn't define it in the code of criminal procedure either, does it?
Well, it defines our arrest authority.
It doesn't define how to do it, so it's based on case law.
Okay.
But we can agree that this, I mean, these conversations happened 4 hours after he was detained.
That was unfortunate, but yes, sir.
Yeah, no, I agree with you with that, but it's still 4 hours, right?
Yes, sir. 4 hours after the crash.
No point in being free to leave, you've been told you couldn't leave many times.
While the officers were awaiting detectives, yes, sir.
I've got nothing.
Just a few brief questions, Judge. Did he ever say, did Mr. Castro ever say that he did not want to speak with you?
Not to my knowledge, no, sir.
Did he ever say that he wanted an attorney?
No, sir.
Nothing further.
Anything else?
No.
All right, so this is what the court still does not know. The court still has not heard testimony on what specifically was alleged to have been said. In order for me to say this is what's being suppressed, all I know so far is that there is a consent to search that was done. A statement was made. I don't know what that statement was because no one has elicited what that statement is. I don't know. I don't know that. So does anybody want to question the witness and ask specifically what statement your client is alleged to have made? And then the court can make a ruling on whether or not it's voluntary under the law?
Judge, I have a transcript of the body camera. It might be easier just to play the body camera, just that small portion of the body camera.
You want to question the witness and ask her specifically what was said?
I can, Judge, I can. So, Manager,
Yes.
sorry, we're gonna do this again, so.
It's Sergeant.
Sergeant, sorry, Sergeant, yeah, you said,
Fine.
yeah, there you go, Sergeant, sorry. So you get there and you speak to some people and then Mr. Castro is to target your investigation. Right,
He's one of the drivers that I speak with.
but you identified him as the bullet vehicle.
Yes, I identified his vehicle as the bullet vehicle
So
in the
that's
crash.
that's the one that's, sorry, that's the one that's caused the crash.
That is the one that initiates the crash. Yes.
So, and then you ask them some questions, so I'm gonna read them to you, you're quickly gonna answer. So we talked about, so you arrive at 5:45. Yep, we established that.
That sounds about right.
You spoke to Sergeant Johnson and said manslaughter, the joke's about
I'm
manslaughter.
gonna object to ask and answer.
All right. So we're gonna go off the record for a moment.
Well, shall we go through some questions really about some changes?
Okay.
Oh, thank you. So you first made contact with Mr. Castro at 5:45.
Around that time, I'm sure.
I'm not approximately. And you know that he's spoken to Officer Morgan for sure.
I'd imagine that he had,
Yeah, and Officer Chavaria was there when you got there,
yes.
and he spoke, do you know what he'd spoken to Officer Chavaria?
I'm unaware if he spoke to Officer Chavaria.
Chavaria was there looking after him at some point, right?
Yes,
We're in close proximity to you,
yes,
right? Would it surprise you if I told you that he had spoken to Officer Chavaria?
it would not.
Good, and that Officer Chavaria, Officer Morgan had told, Mr. Castro that he couldn't leave because he was waiting for detectives.
Okay.
And that was 3 hours before.
Okay,
Officer Chavaria had told him he couldn't leave even though his wife was there and he wanted to go and see her.
Okay.
Right, and then you spoke to Mr. Castro, right? And you had an initial conversation with him and we expect you to do that, right, because it's your investigation. But then after you've had an initial conversation, you've gone to your supervisors and you're discussing this case. And that's where you're having a discussion about manslaughter. All right, so we're going to move on from that before I get an objection. So you asked Mr. Castro what happened.
yes,
Do you remember him saying, I was just driving northbound?
yes.
And then you say, what lane was he in? Remember what he said?
He originally said the center lane, and I explained to him that there's only 2 lanes.
Okay, and then he said he was in the right lane.
Yes,
And then, do you remember what else he said then?
I believe he said something about seeing the HEB 18-wheeler. He really couldn't explain how the crash happened. He said he didn't know.
Yep.
That all of a sudden the vehicle, which he was referring to the Honda Accord, the vehicle was underneath him. So he really couldn't explain, how the crash happened.
Right, and that's basically what he said. He said it was weird. He got lifted up, the Honda was underneath it.
Mhm.
And he kept asking questions. And kept answering them, right?
About the crash, yes.
Yeah, and he said, how far back were you from the 18-wheeler? And he said 30 feet.
I don't recall how many feet he said.
Oh, and then you kept asking questions about the 18-wheeler in front of him,
Okay,
right? And you asked him if they were a standstill, if they were traveling, if the vehicles were traveling.
yes, I remember that.
He said, they're traveling.
I believe he said everyone was traveling. We were all traveling.
We were all, that's exactly what he said, we were traveling. Have you
Mr.
reviewed your voice?
You're going a little too fast.
Sorry, no, sorry, you're absolutely right, he said we were all traveling,
I remember that because I remember everyone being stopped.
but that was his perception, right?
Mhm.
You weren't there at the same time.
Correct.
And then. You asked him if he flipped his vehicle.
Yeah, I asked him if you remember, rolling.
Onto the right fence. Right,
Yes, the way he described it, he believed he flipped toward his passenger side, so toward his right.
onto his right side, yeah. You asked him where he was coming from,
Yes,
he said 1604,
yes,
right? And then you said, where were you at, where were you at, or where had you been, something like that, right?
yes,
Remember you telling he'd been at a friend's house,
I do.
and he'd gone to pick up somebody, then he was heading home?
Yes,
You asked him how fast he was going,
yes,
he said he was going 75,
yes,
and then he told you that traffic was flowing pretty good.
yes, I remember.
Also, it snaps, he said it makes a snapping noise.
I don't recall if he snapped.
You said, okay, so you didn't see this vehicle at all, you didn't see an impact? Right,
Yes,
and he said, I didn't see this vehicle until I walked back this way, I have no idea what happened.
yes,
Then you asked him the question about drinking again, he said, have you been drinking at all? He says, yes, I was drinking earlier. Remember you asked him what time?
yes.
Remember what time he told you?
He said approximately, I believe, 6:30
Right,
p.m.
about 6 p.m. And then you asked him what time it is now,
Yes,
and he knew what time it is, right?
he knew what time it was because his alarm went off for work.
So you were 6 a.m. -ish.
Yes,
It's 6 something now, 6:09. So you asked him if he was drinking 12 hours ago.
yes,
He said yes. Then you asked him if he thought he was under the influence at all.
Yes,
You've been under the influence. He said no.
yes,
And asked him if you could check his eyes and he let you.
yes.
And then he told you, did you ask him medical screening questions?
I did not, but I believe he mentioned he had previously suffered some sort of head trauma. He specifically said a TBI.
And then then again at 6:12 on the body camera, would you have reason to doubt me?
Okay.
You still questioning then, you said, can you tell me how much you had to drink?
Yes, sir.
You know what he said?
He said he had 4 beers.
This, and you said this was at your friend's house.
I asked him if he was drinking at his friend's house.
Yeah. And do you remember what he said?
He said no, that he had went to his friend, he told me where he was drinking, which was like a golfing range or.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're called.
He played golf, it was hitting some golf balls.
Golf balls, yeah, a driving range.
Yeah.
And that he had went to a friend's, but that he wasn't drinking at his friend's house.
What he said, and you kept asking questions about where his friend's house was,
Yes,
what time he left. Right,
yes, I was trying to gather where he was actually coming from, not the highway, not 1604, but he couldn't tell me where his friend lived.
yeah, he's still not been arrested,
No, not arrested.
still not been warned.
No, sir.
And then you asked that you established that you stopped drinking about 8:30.
Yes, I believe he gave like a 2-hour time frame of when he was drinking, like 6:30 to 8:30 or 6 to 8 maybe.
And then you've asked him again, at the time of the crash, did he feel like it was unsafe for him to drive? And then you asked him a couple of questions, did he feel basically intoxicated with the words you used?
Okay,
And do you remember what he said?
I believe he replied that he was not, that he did not feel intoxicated.
Just half time, right? Okay. And you kept asking questions, and then at this point you leave to go and speak to Sergeant Johnson again. And I believe this is your testimony was when you said that you spoke to Sergeant Johnson and you came back. And then at 6:40 you go back to speak to him again, him being Mr. Castro, right?
Okay,
And then at this point you're asking, look, the issue is, do you remember what you said to him?
when I returned to speak to him,
Yeah.
not specifically, no.
Would it be the fact that you're kind of trying to reconcile that you don't believe what he's saying based on, or what he's saying doesn't match up with the evidence you see at the scene? Would that be a fair assessment of what you're kind of discussing with him?
Well, he was unable to provide any real detail about the crash. Basically what we gathered is that he was driving.
Well, he's driving, right? He said he was driving.
That's about all we got.
And you're saying that the damage doesn't make any sense and he understands what you're saying, right?
You'll have to repeat that.
Well, you say, he says, yeah, I get what you're saying. Because you're saying the issue is this car. You see, it has no front end damage. All it is rear end damage. It tells me that you hit it. Does that make sense? It's like, yeah, I get what you're saying.
Yes, at that point, I was explaining what I observed at the scene, the damage I observed, the roadway evidence I observed. And I was explaining to him, trying to simplify crash investigation and just how basic physics work.
And then, he says, all I remember is me driving and then going sideways.
Correct.
Well, basically, you ask him to consent to download the consent form that I've given you and you signed it.
I did explain to him the purpose of the search, and it was to download the airbag control module, which stores essential crash data. And after explaining that to him, he verbally consented to verbally consented to the search, and that's when I got the form for him to sign.
Do you remember having a conversation with your colleagues about it would be better to try and get him to sign the consent than having to get a warrant from a judge? Because last time someone tried to get a warrant from the judge, they asked too many questions, and this would be the best way around getting it.
I don't recall that conversation.
Would it help you to watch your body camera?
I don't believe so.
Refresh your memory.
No, sir.
if I put it to you that if I represent to you that you had that conversation, and that happened, would you have any reason to doubt me?
I don't specifically think I would use those words. We frequently would get search warrants for vehicles. They weren't difficult to get signed. It's just, it's a lot of extra work to get a search warrant, but it wasn't difficult to get them.
I'm not saying that, I'm asking about the conversation you had with Detective Doyle, Sergeant Johnson was there. You stood around talking about it's better to get him to sign the consent than to go to a judge, because last time something happened and the judge was asking a lot of questions and this would be a lot easier. And that's why you did that. And then you went, after having that conversation, you asked Mr. Castro to sign the consent form, and he did.
After verbally consenting, yes, he signed the consent to search
And
warrant.
let him go.
Yes,
But despite that conversation, you didn't warn him. You're not denying that conversation took place.
the conversation with my colleagues, I don't recall having it. No, sir.
All right, any other questions?
Just, I'd like to refresh the officer's memory with a camera.
Anything else? Any argument with regards to whether or not the states are admissible?
Yes, please.
All right, with regards to the statements made by the defendant to this witness, that's going to be suppressed with regards to, and those are just the statements made to this witness. With regards to the consent to search, that objection will be sustained and it will be suppressed. Anything else?
Judge, if we could just have a brief argument on the consent to search.
All right.
Judge, here, at no point was him signing the consent to search in any way conditioned on he would be allowed to leave. She asked him at one point if he would be willing to do it. He gives verbal consent and says, I don't have a problem with that. She then takes further steps to explain exactly what she's looking for. And again, at no point does he ever say, I don't want that to be searched, or I don't want that to happen. Again, she goes into painstaking detail as to why she's asking for the consent. And then at that point, that's where she walks away and gets a form so that she can then say, well, if you're willing to let me search, can you sign the form? And at that point, again, he signs it. He gets a chance to read it. He gets the opportunity to, she explains it to him. She's explaining exactly what she's looking for. And at no time is she pressuring him, threatening him, or doing any sort of coercion or intimidation. The state's argument is that at that point, it's two different issues. He's been there for quite a bit of time. That's the Fifth Amendment issue. But the Fourth Amendment issue here is that, again, she's making sure that it is free and voluntary and that he has full understanding of what he's doing. Again, it says, and very quickly, I don't have a problem with that. And again, after that point, she goes, again, more detail, more effort to make sure he knows exactly what he's doing when he signs that form.
All right, but if his statements are not freely and voluntarily given because he wasn't Mirandized, then how is the consent to search voluntarily done?
Well, Judge, that's a separate issue. Again, it's not that she's looking for any incriminating evidence. She's not asking him for any information. She's just asking for permission. And at that point, again, she's not trying to elicit any sort of testimony or information. She's just asking, can I search it? Can I look? And that's it. At no point are his rights violated. He's freely saying, yes, you can search. I do not have a problem with it. It's exactly what he says, and it's the fact that she doesn't pressure him. Again, I think she went above and beyond to make sure that he fully understood exactly what he was signing and exactly what he was doing. And once he signs, again, the only reason why she keeps him any longer is just so that she could say, can I get this signature? If you consent, can you sign it, please? And then after that point, he signs it. Again, she doesn't force his hand on the pen. She gives him the chance to read it. She explains, and he takes the time to read it. She reads part of it to him so that she understands this is exactly what I'm doing.
All right, defense.
Judge, very briefly,
And if I could see the exhibit, please, of the consent. Thank you.
Mr. mistakes were made in this investigation, we can accept that, and we're not putting that on any individual officer, certainly not this officer. But the fact and the law still remains, Judge, it's the Rodriguez versus United States issue as well, that it's prolonged detention. There's been a manifestation, and Judge, I will give you the case law that I prepared on it, because it supports my argument. I'll give a copy to the state as well, and it's based on,
All right, and defense, it clearly states on the defense exhibit 4 that that Mr. Castro is informed of his constitutional right not to have a search made of his vehicle. So let's start there.
well, Judge, he's been detained at this scene for 4 hours. Judge, and he's asked to leave multiple times, and he's been told he can't leave. And there's Court Criminal Appeals in Dalvik versus State, I'm going to give a copy to that now. Made up.
Oh, I'm aware of that case law.
I'll give it to you anyway. I'll give a
Okay,
copy to the
all right,
state.
thank you.
There's four prong test to whether somebody is in custody. There's 4 general situations, and only the court's aware of it. When a suspect is physically deprived of their freedom of action in a significant way. We apply that to these facts. Mr. Castro wasn't allowed to leave for 4 hours. When law enforcement tell a suspect he can't leave, we heard testimony yesterday from both Officer Morgan and Officer Chavaria saying that they both told him he couldn't leave. When his wife came, he wanted to go to the bathroom, he wasn't allowed to leave, that's for sure. When law enforcement create a situation that would lead a reasonable person to believe their freedom of movement was being significantly restricted, well, he couldn't even go to the bathroom off the highway, couldn't go and see his wife. Then the fourth prong, which is where my questioning was, Your Honour, is when there is probable cause to arrest and law enforcement do not tell the suspect that they are free to leave. And that's the prong here that's supported by my other case law I brought to the court today, which is Otter versus State, and I'll give a copy to the state as well. Which is a case out of San Antonio, which discusses that 4th prong, Judge. It specifically says if an officer has got probable cause to arrest and they fail to manifest that to the defendant and they don't let them go, give them an opportunity to go, then that constitutes custodial interrogation. Now, if the officer, it's basic criminal law, and the officer, Sergeant Martinez, told us that if she suspects, if she's got probable cause to arrest, she'll arrest. And if you arrest, you then warn a person before their statements become admissible. And if you have got probable cause to arrest and you don't warn somebody and you keep questioning them, that means those statements are inadmissible. Judge, I know that Sergeant Martinez said that she was joking, but there is adequate, she spoke to Mr. Castro several times. Now, she may be having an inside joke, but she said to her supervisor, everyone's getting arrested for manslaughter. Mr. Castro is the target of the investigation. She's talking about him, Judge.
All right, so counsel, what I'm dealing with now is I've already granted your motion to suppress the statements. What we're focusing on right now is this consent to search. That's it. So let's get to this consent to search.
Thank you, Judge. And so at this point, the test is it's the Jackson v. Deno factor, Judge, that it's that Mr. Castro, his will has been basically overborne. The only way he can leave is either to go away and cuss or to submit to whatever the officer wants. And in fact, that's what happens. She gets a signature and he leaves. That's the only way he can leave the scene. And so at that point, it's not consent. Any consent is not freely and knowingly given. It's the only thing he can do to get out of there.
All right, state.
Judge, so we do have, it's Meeks v. State and Meekins v. State, for the court to look at. And then we did tender copies of the case. So the case law that defense is citing right now, it's all in regards to statements. It hasn't actually touched on whether or not consent to search. In those cases, again, it's the primary concern is what statements the defendant made. And the states, again, it's 2 separate issues. It's the statements versus the search. Again, in this case, she reads him the consent to search. She reads she allows him a chance to read it. She also says you don't have to sign it. She does at one point give him the option of you don't have to sign it. Never, again, is conditioning him on, you have to allow the search in order for me to let you go. So, Your Honor, the state is again asking for the court to reconsider due to the fact that it's two separate issues. There is the issue of of the Miranda warning and whether or not he's in custody. I understand that the court's already ruled there. But the issue on whether or not the search that was conducted is valid, that's a completely different issue. The two cases that the state has provided, those are saying in essence, I know that in one of them, it was, asking for whether or not they can search something, and even then, it's just, yeah, I guess so. Even just saying, I guess so, that was enough. They don't need to, say an affirmative yes.
All right, so court has heard enough from each side. We're going to be back here at 3:15, have the jury come in at 3:15, and I'll give you my decision with regards to consent. With regards to the statements, you're not allowed to mention anything that Mr. Castro said to you. Do you understand?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And with regards to the consent to search, I'll come back with my ruling at 3:15. All right, is there anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. All right, you all can take your break.
Yes, sir. Sergeant Martinez, I think the last place we left off on was that you had walked the scene and you had taken a look at the cars and that gave you some insight as to how the crash, or what may have happened in the crash. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what insights did you gain?
Basically that it appeared, that Mr. Castro's vehicle, the, Chevrolet pickup, was what we refer to as the bullet vehicle in crash investigation. So basically the initiating vehicle to the crash, and that he had, struck the Honda Accord, with a substantial amount of force and speed. And that he continued down the highway in the same direction he had been traveling northbound on 281 and subsequently struck the Volkswagen Atlas.
And after you walked the scene and made that determination, or at least made that determination, did you talk to the drivers that were involved in this crash?
I did. I spoke to all of the drivers, including the 18-wheeler driver.
And did speaking with these drivers assist in your investigation?
Yes.
And as a part of your investigation, I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit. State's Exhibit number 102. Do you recognize this?
Yes.
What is that?
The consent to search form. It's a standard department form that we use.
And what exactly is on this form?
Basically, it's the defendant's name, Mr. Castro, stating that he's aware of his rights and that he is voluntarily consenting to a search of his vehicle. There's several parts you can fill out: home, vehicle, business, etc. But obviously only the vehicle part is filled in.
And is this a true and accurate copy of the form that he signed?
Yes, sir, it appears so.
Your Honor, State would offer State's 102 in evidence.
Defense?
Judge, just a prior objection.
All right, that will be overruled. State's Exhibit 102 is admitted.
And so with State's 102, what did you proceed to do?
I'm sorry, can you please?
Oh, let me re-ask that. That was a little confusing. What exactly were you trying to search through that consent to search form?
It was to search the airbag control module inside the vehicle.
And what's an airbag control module?
The easiest way to describe it, so if you're all familiar with planes, they all have a little black box. So do your vehicles. So essentially it's your little black box in your car. It's a computer, basically like a hard drive, that stores information, but also triggers safety mechanisms in the vehicle. So all of your vehicles are equipped with sensors. Whenever these sensors are triggered, this little computer that's working much faster than the human brain is triggering the responses, your safety belt pretensioners, things like that, your airbag deployment, etc.
And so what do you use the airbag control module to do?
So they're all different at their base, so there isn't any kind of conformity as far as makes and models. The manufacturers are allowed to decide what's being stored essentially. So the older vehicles or the kind of lesser expensive cars or the not so safe cars, Volvo, they're super safe or anyway. They can kind of elect what is getting saved on that hard drive, but the report essentially shows that type of data, rollover instances, front end crashes, rear end crashes. It's storing all that information.
And I guess just to clarify, so what specific information are you looking for whenever you look at an airbag control module?
Well, it's report dependent. So, like with the Chevrolet, it was a pretty extensive report compared to the Honda's report, and it had data like explaining seat occupancies. So, for instance, there's a driver, the driver's seat is occupied, the passenger seat was not. Whether the driver is wearing their safety belt. It does record speeds. It does record engaging the brake. So if you break prior to, it's also timed. So the way it works is it's cycling through almost like a buffer. So it's constantly recording, but it's constantly being overwritten. And at the moment that something triggers, some kind of activation, like a sensor triggers, your safety belt to lock up, your airbags to deploy, it backtracks. So it'll give me, let's say, -5 seconds, -8 seconds prior to that event.
And I'm gonna approach with what's been marked as State Exhibit number 100. Do you recognize this form?
Yes.
And what is this form?
Oh, it's the same form of consent to search. It's a department issued form.
Well, and what specifically are you trying to search with this form?
So the same thing, the victim's father, Alex's father, he signed a consent to search for the vehicle for the Honda Accord.
And again, this is a true and accurate copy of that form that the victim's father signed for the Honda Accord.
Yes.
Your Honor, State would offer State Exhibit number 100. Thanks.
All right, no objections to 100?
And so,
Defense, no objections to 100?
objection, Judge.
All right, State's Exhibit number 100 is admitted without objection.
did you end up performing any sort of analysis on both the Honda and the Chevrolet Silverado?
Yes.
And what sort of analysis did you do?
Judge, come here, please.
Yes. All right,
Well, Sergeant Martinez, have you received training and gone to any sort of courses in regards to analyzing the data out off of an airbag control module?
Yes.
And what type of training did you receive?
It's a standard class for crash data retrieval, and I received both my technical certification and my analyst certification.
And this data that's pulled from the airbag crash model or airbag control module, is this something that's used in crash reconstruction often?
Yes.
And is this something that's been tested through studies and other sort of tests to show that it's true and accurate?
It's nationally accepted, yes.
And so what sort of analysis did you perform on both of these airbag control modules?
So I performed an imaging of both modules in the Honda Accord and in the Chevrolet pickup. We call it an imaging because we're simply copying the data. It's not a download, it's just basically mirroring the data that's saved on the hard drive. That the data is expressed in like numbers basically, but then a report's actually generated that you can plainly read like a book.
And so you were able to pull the data for both of these vehicles.
Yes.
I'm gonna show you what's been marked as State Exhibit number 101 and 103. Do you recognize these?
Yes, so they're the reports, the crash data retrieval reports for the Chevrolet pickup and the Honda Accord.
So let's start with States 101. Which vehicle is that specifically?
This is gonna be the Chevrolet pickup.
And then States 103, which vehicle is that for?
This is for the Honda Accord.
And if you can, just take a look through the reports just to verify, are these the same reports that you were able to generate from the data on the airbag control module?
Yes, they appear to be the printed out reports.
Your Honor, State would offer State Exhibit number 101 and 103 in evidence.
Any objections?
Federated defense.
Yes, and could I see 101 and 103, please? And also if I could see, I believe it was 100.
And 102, Judge.
102, if I could see 102, please.
I think I gave you.
All right, and States Exhibit 100, that was the one that you had no objection to, correct?
I don't have any opposed. I said, I don't have any opposed, sorry.
This was the one.
No, there's not.
Okay, and then with regards to States Exhibits 101 and 103, you want to reserve your objection for now? All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna have you step back just briefly, and I will bring you back out by 3:45. Remember my previous instructions. All right, everyone, please rise for the jurors. Mr. Period. In case you need those. Just sorry, just 1 second. All right, and you want to take the witness on voir dire? Oh, it doesn't have to be brief, all right,
I think it would be great, Josh.
all right.
So you can say if you need to, you have to get
Yeah.
more comfortable. So I've got a couple of brief questions just to ask you about some of the stuff you just said. So we're talking about the proposed States Exhibits 101 and 103, and these are the reports from the CDR from the two vehicles. 101, I think is a Chevrolet, 103 is the Honda. And so you said that you obviously you've had extensive training and experience in factory construction.
Yes,
I
sir.
want to ask you about so did you go to, now, there are different software that interprets these CDR systems. Can we just call them CDRs, the black box?
The airbag control models.
Airbag control modules. There's different software, right?
Yes,
And different companies.
yes,
Now, you'd agree that both, can I approach Josh?
Yes,
101 and 103 are both, you use the Bosch,
Bosch.
software, is that right?
yes.
And do you go to, where do you get trained on that?
It was here in San Antonio.
In San Antonio, you don't go to a Bosch facility?
No, sir.
How does that work? Does someone come to you?
Yes, someone comes to our police training academy and conducts the training course there.
And not, obviously not for recruits.
No, it's for the investigators.
Right, the advanced stuff, right? So, you said that you had training in both being a technician and an analyst, right?
Correct.
And so when was that training?
I'll have to refer to my resume. That's
Yeah,
fine.
well, have you? So I can get a copy of that.
I do.
Can I very judge? Do you mind if I?
yes.
Do you want me to answer the question or do you just want to read it?
Well, I'd like to have a look at it, because if I'd had a copy of it, I could have, we could have,
I brought it for my reference.
thank you.
Mhm.
Sorry, is this the one, right?
Mhm.
Okay, cool. And where is it on here?
It'll be at the very bottom under certifications.
So it was in August 2021?
That sounds about right.
Is that the one we're talking about there? These ones. Is that it or not?
So it's going to be the CSI Crash Data Retrieval Technician certification in August of 21. And I received the CSI Crash Data Retrieval Analyst certification in February of 22.
Okay, can I keep this for a second?
Yes, sir.
And what's the difference between the two?
The technical course is all of the familiarizing yourself with the hardware and physically doing the imaging, the downloads essentially. And the analyst course is analyzing the reports that are generated from the hardware.
So were you trained to remove the boxes from the vehicles?
Yes,
And in this case, did you remove the boxes from the vehicles?
I don't believe I had to remove it from the Chevrolet. I'll have to refer to my my prosecution guide.
Of
I
course.
should have notated it.
And what, yeah, I'll let you do that. Sorry.
No, so it appears that I connected the CDR hardware through the OBD port in the Chevrolet Silverado. So through the onboard diagnostics port that's usually located on the lower dash, like underneath the driver's side. It's typically where it's at in most vehicles. It looks like that's how I imaged the airbag control module.
Okay, so you didn't remove or attempt to remove the unit from the vehicle?
No.
So there's no chance that you've induced another event in the data?
No, typically that requires power anyway. So, and most of the vehicles that we deal with can't sustain power.
Okay, no, sorry, Sergeant, I didn't mean to interrupt you. And so tell us about your training to become an analyst, because there's a difference, right? So would it be fair to say the difference between a technician and an analyst, if for someone like me, would be the difference between like someone who can operate a breath test machine and the breath test supervisor? Would that be right? Someone says, I can say it's working versus I know it's working because I've got the science and the education behind it. Is that what the analyst's course gives you?
Not necessarily. So the technician is just more the hands-on, so just physically doing the work, and then the analyst would be sitting there at the desk reading the report.
Yeah, the person who can testify to the actual readout and what that means, right?
Yes.
And have you got, you can say with a scientific certainty that this device or the CDR was undamaged?
They're typically undamaged in my experience, the way that they're encased in the vehicle. We've had vehicles completely engulfed and we've been able to get readings. Like they've been engulfed in flames
Of fire, right?
of fire. And we were still able to get a download.
Just to give
Yes.
respect to Sergeant, and to the best of your knowledge, you can state that there was no damage to this unit in this case?
I didn't physically observe the actual ACM, the actual hard drive in the vehicle,
So you
since I
don't-
downloaded through the OBD.
Through your training experience by your download, it appears to be working.
Yes, I didn't get any download issues, and the information downloaded just fine.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Judge.
All right, any other questions?
Yeah, other than that, I've got no further questions, Judge, but I do have
All right, and the court then will hear argument.
briefly, Judge, this evidence has been obtained in violation. We object to the introduction of this evidence because opposition has been obtained in violation of Mr. Castro's Fourth Amendment rights. For the arguments we provided earlier, Judge, we'll defer to the court.
All right, and then with regards to expertise, because you said you wanted you're not challenging the expertise?
It was mostly, she's answered my question, Judge. We've got no problem with that. No
All right.
objection to that, Judge.
All right, Deputy Laura, if you'll bring the jurors in. Oh, and state defense, you all left me with 100 and 102.
Sorry, Judge.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. We're ready.
All right, for the jury.
All right, everyone, please be seated. And state your witness.
Thank you, Judge. So Sergeant Martinez, so how would you have pulled this data from the, on States 101 from the Chevy Silverado?
I connected the CDR hardware to the OBD port in the vehicle.
And then once you've gotten the data from the ACM, how do you interpret it? Well, what do you use to interpret it?
So it's a hardware and software system that works in conjunction with one another. And once the hard drive disk, the ACM is imaged, it generates a report, a readable report in a PDF form.
And if you could take a look at States 101. So you were talking earlier about events. What exactly did you mean by that?
It's the way that the hard drive just stores memory, so it'll have a memory cap. Like I was explaining earlier, there are certain instances where it can be overwritten. So depending on the make and model, there's only so many events that can be stored on an ACM. And they're categorized, like prioritized. So some will be deployment events, essentially anything that deploys airbags, those are all saved. If there's any events that occur after the fact, but there's no longer memory, it can't save anymore. And then there are non-deployment events, so things that trigger a response but aren't necessarily considered a deployment. So any kind of safety belt tightening or any safety belt activation of your basically your safety belt locking up. That's considered a non-deployment typically. So if that needs to be overwritten, that can be overwritten.
And how many specific events are we looking at in regards to this case?
I'll have to refer to the report or my report.
Yes, ma'am.
Mic. Thank you.
So for the Chevrolet, there were 3 events recorded. 2 were deployment events and 1 was a non-deployment event.
And was there data for all of these events?
Yes,
And what specific data? Was it pre-crash data?
yes, pre-crash data.
And what does that pre-crash data tell you?
Again, it depends on the make and manufacturer, but usually that's what I was explaining earlier. The system will backtrack several seconds and start recording at that point or saving the recordings. In most cases, again, it'll tell me speed. It'll tell me if the driver or passenger, if there's a passenger in the vehicle, if they were wearing their safety belts at the time of the crash, if airbags deployed, if there was a rollover event. So your vehicle works on axes, kind of like those toys that you spin. I don't remember what they're called. But there are several axes on the vehicle, and any kind of change in direction or change in rotation, it records all of that.
So you mentioned whether or not there was a passenger. Was there a passenger in Mr. Castro's car?
No.
Okay. And was Mr. Castro buckled in?
Yes.
And do you have any pre-crash data in concern to the crash that occurred with Ms. Seibert's car?
Yes.
And what does the data show?
In reference to
What does the data show in reference to speed?
speed. So prior to colliding, I'll have to refer to the report now.
Yes, ma'am.
So pre-crash data prior to collision with the Honda. We have an accelerating speed, so about 5 seconds to approximately 2 seconds prior to the collision. The vehicle was traveling at 90 miles per hour. Within 1.5 seconds to a half second prior to the crash, which is basically upon impact, the vehicle accelerated to 91 miles per hour.
So what you're telling the jury is that about 5 seconds before the crash, he was at 90 miles per hour. And about 1.5 seconds before the crash, he accelerated 1 mile up 1 mile per hour to 91.
Correct.
And does that any of the data, does it show if he ever hit his brakes?
No, the brakes were not activated at any point within those 5 seconds.
And looking at the accelerator, was there any change in how much acceleration that he was giving to the truck?
Yes, so the percent of the throttle position also increased along with the speed.
And what does that indicate to you?
So they're correlating values. They usually run in conjunction with each other. So as speed increases, you would imagine that the throttle percent would also increase, and it did in this case.
And now let's go on to event record number 2. What are you able to tell about event record number 2 from States 101?
I believe, can I refer to my report also? Right,
Okay.
okay. So event record 2 ended up being a rollover event. And the data from the pre-crash data from that event showed that the vehicle initially rolled toward the right, which would be the passenger side, so clockwise. But essentially ended up rolling entirely, like rolling over to the left counterclockwise.
And are you given any idea about what happened to the airbags during the course of these crashes? Does the States 101 give you any information in that regard?
Yeah, it'll show that the airbags deployed.
And let's move on to event record number 3. Does the CDR have any information in regards to the speed that Mr. Castro was going at event record number 3?
Let me see. So event record 3 was a non-deployment, but it shows that it does have pre-crash data, so there should be speed recorded. Sorry, these reports are usually really long. It's still reporting the 91 miles per hour. That's the last recorded speed for that event, which these all would have been on top. Each event is on top of each other. I'm talking within half a second, fractions of a second, basically, that the system's recording events, especially in this case where the vehicle, began to roll over. So it still has it at the 91 miles per hour, but that's at 1.5 seconds prior to the event record 3. And then it's recording its final speed at 0 miles per hour at the end.
And going to specifically Mr. Castro's Chevy Silverado, was there anything about the vehicle that had been changed from the manufacturer that you could tell?
Yes, so we do a standard safety recall check. For this vehicle, there weren't any safety recalls or any unrepaired issues for the vehicle. The vehicle did have slightly larger tires than manufacturer recommended. Most people don't account for that. So most people don't get the vehicle recalibrated. So because of that, the actual speed that the vehicle's traveling would essentially be higher than the reported speed that the computer is tracking, because the computer is thinking you have the manufacturer's tires on the car. So we're recording tire rotation, but larger tires cover more distance, which means more speed. So the actual speed would have been faster than the recorded speed.
Now, was the data that you looked at from state exhibit number 101, was that consistent with the physical evidence that you had seen from both the vehicle and at the crime scene?
You can object to speculation.
All right, that'll be overruled.
Yes, sir.
And let's move on to states 103. That's the CDR report for the victim's vehicle.
For the Honda.
Yes, ma'am. And so when did you get this data from the victim's vehicle?
According to my report, this was obtained on August 23rd.
And again, did you use the same process in order to get this data that you did on the defendant's vehicle?
Yes, I reported that I connected the CDR tool to the vehicle through the OBD. So the same process.
So I want to go over some of the data that you found from that's in states 103. How many events were recorded?
There were two events recorded. One was a deployment and one was a non-deployment.
And were both records complete?
Yes, it shows that both recorded and were complete.
And was there any pre-crash data for both of these events?
Also pre-crash data for both. Yes, sir.
What about the tires? I know I asked you that about Mr. Castro's vehicle, but was there anything peculiar about the victim's tires?
No, sir, there did not appear to be, same as the manufacturer recommendation, so the speeds indicated in the report should be the accurate speeds.
Were there any sort of safety recalls for the victim's vehicle?
No safety recalls or unrepaired issues. No.
So what was the victim buckled in? Was she buckled in at the time of the crash?
Yes, sir.
And what does the pre-crash data show about the victim's speed prior to the crash?
So this report also allowed for a 5-second backtrack. So at about 5 seconds to 3 seconds prior to the crash, or 3.5 seconds, 5 seconds to 3.5 seconds, the vehicle was traveling 0 miles per hour. So idling at a stop, and then within 3 seconds, that's when the vehicle began to accelerate slightly. And that, let me see. This is pre-crash for event record 1. Oh, I'm sorry, I was reading accelerate pedal position. So
I'm sorry.
I was reading the accelerate, like the pedal position. So 5 seconds to 2.5 seconds, 0 miles per hour. So at a standstill. Within 2 seconds, that's when the vehicle began to slightly accelerate from 2 miles per hour up to 5 miles per hour at 1.5 seconds prior to the crash. Eventually up to 8 miles per hour within the 1 second to 0 seconds prior to the crash, or to the time of the crash.
And was there any sort of steering input that was found at this time?
There was a slight steering input. So while the vehicle was at a standstill, there was no steering input. And as the vehicle gradually began to accelerate, there was a clockwise, a right steering input. It began at a 25 degree, all the way up to a 75 degree. So that the steering wheel is a circle, it's 360 degrees around. So you would think, 25 out of the 360, 75 out of the 360, that would have been approximately 3 o'clock.
So what would that indicate to you? All of this data that you're finding?
In my professional opinion, I believe the victim,
Was the victim moving at the time of the crash?
yes,
And where was she moving?
to the right, it would have been to the right shoulder because she was in the right lane.
So she, right before the accident, was able to accelerate to the right.
Yeah, up until the few seconds before.
Now, was the data that you found on States 103, was that consistent with the physical evidence and the vehicle evidence that you saw, both at the crime scene and both in regards to looking at the vehicle?
Yes, sir.
And the pre-crash data for event record 2, I wanted to talk about that. It does show that the speed, the vehicle speed increased to 29 miles per hour. Can you explain that? In event record 2.
Right, so that's an acceleration of the vehicle, that's post-impact.
So what does that mean?
Essentially, since it was post-impact, the bullet vehicle is going to determine the direction and also the speed, the force of which the target vehicle is going to go.
So is it fair to say that that post-impact speed, that's how fast she was accelerated due to the crash?
Correct.
And is it fair to say that based off of that data shows that the defendant was going at about 91 miles per hour
Objection been asked and answered.
Sustained.
Well, let's get into, how would you confirm the data that you found on the CPR?
So we use the data from the CDR. We use it to validate the crash math that we calculate.
Well, crash math, can you explain that to the jury? What do you mean by that?
So basically, again, it's a lot of math, it's a lot of physics. A lot of it is comparable to algebra, a little bit of like trigonometry. So math like that. There's a lot of variables involved, but they're typically defined or we determine the values for them based on measurements we take out at the scene. And with a crash like this, it's considered a linear crash. So this is actually one of the more easier crashes to calculate the math because there's not a lot of angles involved. Typically, when multiple vehicles are involved and they're not really in a straight line, we have to account for angles, approach angles, departure angles. We have to account for momentum. So in this situation, we really didn't have to do any of that. It was a very straightforward crash, and because of where the vehicles were traveling from, or where they were at, and where they ended up, it was basically almost in a straight line. So it was very easy to calculate the math from the distance that was traveled.
So I'm going to show you, it's already been entered. State's exhibit number 94. Can you step down and take a look at this?
Yes.
Can you take my keys?
Uh,
This, yes.
So Sergeant Martinez, have you ever seen this?
Yes.
What is this?
So this is the drawing diagram. So Detective Doyle would have done this in the computer system, the drawing program.
So how would this be useful for you in order to calculate the speed using the roadway evidence?
This is where I would take all my measurements from and the numbers that I'm using.
And how are you getting these measurements?
So they're based on the actual points that Detective Doyle would have mapped out at the scene.
And you mentioned earlier that the crash was sort of linear. Is that kind of shown somewhere on this diagram? What you mean by that?
I just mean that everything's essentially in a straight line. That there's no real altering from the line by more than, let's say, 10 degrees or so. Whenever you have something that's basically a straight line, that's not offset more than 10 degrees, you can use those linear equations.
Thank you. You can have a seat now. I'm going to show you what's been marked as state exhibit number 104. Do you recognize this?
Oh, yes. So this is the crash map that I submitted with my prosecution guide.
And are you the one that did? So what exactly is the crash math? Can you explain that to the jury?
Yes.
About now is really complicated, right? I just want to, have you got, is it on your resume, your training experience about the crash math?
Yes, sir.
Can you show me? Can you have a look? Is that all right? So what training, because I mean, have you got a degree in math?
I do not.
Do you have a degree in physics?
I do not.
I don't either. What training experience do you have? Because you're right, I agree with you. There's a lot of math and physics involved in these calculations, right? Can you explain what training you've had to do these calculations?
So it's all the crash reconstruction courses. I've had the basic crash investigation course, that was in the police academy. And then I've had the intermediate course. I've actually taken that course twice because I took it through our department and I took it through the state. And then I took the advanced crash investigation course, and then I took the full reconstruction course.
And do you remember the names of any of your instructors?
I'd be guessing his last name. I know it's David, because what was the last name?
David Aguirre?
Aguirre, yes.
So he was one of your instructors.
One of the instructors, yes, sir.
Right, okay, so let's give you back to you. Obviously, what we're going to get into, one of the things we're going to get into is your I don't even know the technical ways, your skid tests.
Yes, sir.
Right, so you did a skid test, so that's the easiest way for me to understand it in this case, right?
Yes, I conducted skid test out at the scene.
And what protocol did you use for that?
I'm sorry?
What protocol did you use?
So there's equipment that we use. It's called the Vericom.
Right,
So we set that up in a similar type vehicle. Usually we try to match similar type and similar weight. And once that's properly set up, you know, and of course calibrated, like leveled in the vehicle, we perform multiple skid tests out on the roadway under the same conditions as similar to the crash. So like as long as the roadway, if it was wet that day, then we wait for it to rain. If it's dry or humid temperature, we try to accommodate for all of the conditions to make sure the roadway is in similar fashion.
that makes sense. And it's the same roadway, in fact, that you did this test on.
Same roadway.
Obviously, you closed it down.
Yes, it was closed down.
And you didn't use so how many tests did you run?
It depends. We'll have to do at least 2, sometimes 3, in order to validate. We have a margin of error, and as long as we can validate two good skid tests, 2 good runs, then we go with the lower drag factor.
And were they within 5% of each other?
Yes, they would have been in order to validate.
Did you record them in your report?
I'll have to reference my report.
Because you'd agree with me to demonstrate the scientific validity of the skid test, they've got to be within 5% of each other.
Correct.
So Darren, you can give me my mark.
It's not detailed in my prosecution guide, but there is a report generated from the Vericom, so there should be a drag factor report that I submitted to the district attorney's office.
I haven't seen it.
No.
If they were to show it to you, could you?
Yeah, I would recognize the report.
I don't think I've seen a report. What's it?
The drag factor? Yeah, I mean, don't like this one.
Can I approach now?
Sure.
Sergeant, is that the one you're talking about?
Yes.
I withdraw that. I've seen it. I didn't realise that, so I've seen it. Okay. And then, right. Okay. So can you point out on there how it's within 5% of each other?
Right, so this records the run numbers.
Right.
It's just that would be 1 and that would be 2, but that's just a number assigned in the
121 and
machine.
122.
Right, but that
Oh,
wasn't my 121st run. It's just in the system. So if we don't clear it or format it. It's just, they're all saved.
Right.
It has a really big hard drive. So they're consecutive runs. That's all that means. So this is, the first one and this is the second one. They're in consecutive numeric order.
Yep.
This is the time that it took. This is the average drag factor that was calculated, and it also accounts for the grade. It's already accounted for. So the way that it's set up is that we start at the endpoint, we reverse to, we give ourselves so many feet in order to get up to the speed we need to in order to stop around the area we want to stop. So that's how it calculates your grade. Like
Right,
if there were any kind of.
because it's slight
Well,
gradient here,
it-
right?
It's a
Yeah.
slight gradient,
Yeah.
sir.
Sorry.
I think I said it's a slight gradient, right? Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's a slight gradient. Okay, so these were the two drag factor amounts. Those are clearly within 5%. These were the speeds,
Yeah.
the average speed, average distance. And that's not calculated GPS speed.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sergeant. And so there are a couple of other variables, Sergeant, that could possibly affect the drag factor analysis, right?
Such as?
So you wouldn't use a car to test a motorcycle's like drag factor on the tires.
No,
So, but in this case, you used, do you know the weight on each axle and the effect that can have on the drag factor? Does that come into your analysis at all?
it has a slight influence, based on, rear, or, front wheel drive, all wheel drive, but it's nothing, it's not gonna be exponential. It's gonna be, fractionable.
And, because the skid test is the first thing you need to determine the drag factor, right? Once you've got the skid test, then you can do the rest of it. So the skid test is the foundation of the rest of the analysis, is that right?
It's to determine the drag factor, and the drag factor is needed in order to calculate, the speed.
Because you didn't use a Silverado to do your skid test, right?
No, we used another pickup.
And it'd be fair to say it was a Ford F-150?
Yes, I believe it's our city-owned vehicle, so it should have been a Ford F-150.
And can you tell the court what difference for validity wise that would have? You'd agree it might have slight bearing on the drag factor of the skid test, is that right?
Very slight, if any.
But it can have an effect on it.
Possibly, depending on, like I said, rear wheel drive, front wheel drive, all wheel drive.
And do you know what the comparison, so the vehicle you use, do you know any of those variables about that vehicle, John?
I believe the Ford we had, the city-owned Ford was a rear wheel drive vehicle. And I believe the Chevrolet should have been an all-wheel drive vehicle.
So does that have a difference? What difference does that have on the actual locking of the wheels and the sliding of the vehicle? You're measuring sliding, aren't you?
Correct.
Yeah.
But we're sliding and stopping in a straight line, so the vehicle's tires are overlapping.
Thank you, Judge. I have no further questions. No objections.
All right. Then there's no objections to our testimony, correct?
No, that's correct, Judge.
All right. Does anybody need a 5-minute break before? All right, so we're off the record. Court reporter, you can take your 5-minute break. Parties, any objections to Yes. All right, state.
Judge, and, just so the record's clear, the state would want to reoffer states exhibit number 101 and 103.
Any objections?
I think just the previous objection, I think it's Judge to one.
Yes.
Re-urge that judge. Okay.
All right, so you're re-urging your objections to 101. All right, so that'll be overruled and States Exhibit 101 is admitted. And with regards to States Exhibit 103, any objections?
No objection to that one, Judge.
All right, then States Exhibit 103 is admitted without objection. All right, you may continue, State.
Sergeant Martinez, we're about to start going into your crash map, but I'm going to show you what's been marked as state exhibit number 105. Do you recognize this?
Yes,
What is it?
it's the drag factor report.
Can you explain what's what's drag factor?
I can read the definition, or so it's basically the resistance that the roadway is creating, the vehicle's tires.
And why is that important whenever you're doing the crash map?
Because so that's we consider work that's left on the roadway. So the vehicle's tires or even any kind of scrape marks, you consider that work, and we have to calculate what that resistance is, what that friction is essentially, because it's helping the vehicle stop.
And how exactly is this report generated?
So this is done through actual test. It was me and Detective Doyle. We went back out to the crash scene. We had the officers shut down the roadway, and we conducted skid test. So we used a similar vehicle. That's what we had available to us, a city-owned vehicle. It was a Ford truck. And we conducted skid tests. They're just like runs. So we were both in the vehicle. We set up the hardware that we use to calculate that. It's a Vericom system. So once we get that set up in the vehicle, we conduct a run. So we accelerate for so many feet, get up to so many miles per hour, and we come to a sudden, hard braking stop. And the Vericom unit calculates our drag factor.
And so states exhibit number 105, is that a true and accurate copy of the report that was generated when you and Detective Doyle did that skid test?
Yes, sir.
And has it been altered in any way?
No, sir.
Your Honor, state would offer states exhibit number 105. And
Any-
tender to defense.
That one. No objection, Judge, to that one.
All right, State's Exhibit number 105 is admitted without objection.
Then I'm gonna show you Sergeant Martinez, what's been marked as State's Exhibit number 106. Do you recognize this?
Yes.
What are we looking at?
So it's similar to those diagrams. It's just a diagram of the scene, a drawing of the scene.
And what is on State's Exhibit number 106 that's not on the other exhibits that are already in evidence?
So I made notations on this one. This is actually my handwriting. So I notated each of the vehicle's weights to include their occupant weights. And then I also notated the distance that isn't, it's not that it's not measurable, but there aren't any lines leading up to the end of the lines that are created by the Volkswagen, which are in green there on the blow up map. And then the distance to the actual Volkswagen, which ended up being 160 feet.
Why was it important to get this data before you conducted your crash map?
Because I need to use this measurement, and I need to use it in order to calculate. So I have to account for that distance. But the thing is, since the vehicle's not leaving any marks on the road, I can't use the drag factor for that distance because there's no active resistance. It's just a rolling resistance. So it's similar to if you had a little toy car, if we're gonna use this, and then you're just rolling it across a surface. It's just a rolling resistance.
And well, why was it necessary to calculate that distance?
Because I mean, the math would be inaccurate without accounting for this distance that was covered. So the vehicle still traveled that distance post impact. It's just the initial distance that it traveled, which I'd have to refer to the crash map, but the initial distance that was traveled, it had active resistance on the roadway. That's why the tire marks are there. But after those tire marks, there's nothing that was visible on the roadway. So I can't use the drag factor because there isn't that active resistance. I have to use the rolling resistance.
Other than the fact that there's no marks on the roadway, how are you able to determine that there was no resistance?
Well, there is resistance. It's just rolling resistance.
How do you know that? How were you, why, from the information you gathered at the scene and in speaking to the drivers, what made that distance requirement, or what made it necessary to get that distance from
Because-
talking to the drivers?
Because this is where they came to a stop. So when I spoke with the driver of the Volkswagen Atlas, he stated that this is where he came to a stop. So after the impact and after, you know, the vehicles leaving the roadway marks, this is where he rolled to a stop.
Okay. And State's Exhibit number 106, is that a true and accurate depiction of the notes that you provided in this case?
Yes.
Has it been altered in any way?
No.
Your Honor, State would offer State's Exhibit number 106 and tender to the defense for any objection.
All right, then State's Exhibits, I'm sorry, what was the number, counsel?
106, sir.
106 is admitted without objection.
And so, Sergeant Martinez, I'm going to ask you to step down from the well to take a look at State's Exhibit number 104 at the projector so you can explain to the jury what we're looking at.
You took your mic? Oh, sorry.
So I'm projecting right now State's Exhibit number 104. So can you explain to the jury, what are we looking at right here? And here you can use a pencil to kind of point to what you're talking about. So this first set of equations, what are we looking at?
So this is your standard speed formula. And I basically have to do it multiple times. It's considered a combined speed. And like I said, it was to cover, so that 160 feet that I explained earlier, it's to cover that distance at a rolling resistance rate, which is the 0.02. And that's how I calculated this speed. But I have to combine it with the speed for the distance where there was actually work left on the roadway, the tire marks. And I have to use the drag factor that was calculated during the skid test And then that's how, and I account for braking efficiency. And then that's how I figure out this separate speed. So these two speeds in combination with each other, that's how we determine the speed that the distance or that the vehicle at least was traveling to cover that distance.
So you said you had a lot of things there. So we're looking at a combined speed. So is that meaning that you're taking the speed from different points and adding it up? Or in essence, combining it together?
Yeah, not adding it up, but essentially, yeah. So I'm accounting for the separate distances and the fact that there was no work on the roadway. So I used the rolling resistance and then the distance where there is work on the roadway, that active resistance where the vehicle's essentially trying to stop or being, stopped more essentially because there's more friction. And that's how I get these two separate numbers.
And just to clarify for the jury, what vehicle are we talking about here?
This is for the Volkswagen Atlas. So whenever we do the crash math calculation, typically we have to work backwards.
And why do you have to work backwards?
Because I can only account for speed loss. So I can account for speed to a stopping point, like essentially the deacceleration of a vehicle.
So you have to start at the end and then work your way back to the beginning. Okay, and so here, what you're able to do, so this portion of State's Exhibit number 104, that's in relation to the Volkswagen whenever there was no marks left on the roadway. Is that correct?
Yes,
And then this second portion, that's the portion where it's the Volkswagen where there are marks on the roadway.
yes,
And then this last portion, that's the portion where you combine both of these in the equation to get the minimum speed that the Volkswagen would have had to have traveled in order to get to the end distance.
the minimum speed to cover that distance, correct?
And what equation or what are we looking at here at this third? It's different from the other two.
This is the combined speed formula.
Okay. So by your math, the Volks, is it? Oh, sorry. Thank you.
I'm not in charge of the projector, guys.
Yeah, and I thought it was covered.
Ella.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. So again, this final number, what is that number for?
So the 22, we usually truncate, we usually drop these numbers off, but the 22.97 miles per hour is essentially the minimum speed that the Volkswagen was traveling in order to cover these listed distances
And-
at those corresponding resistance.
And is that the minimum speed would have had to have traveled after it was struck by the defendant's Chevrolet Silverado?
Post impact, correct?
Okay. And then page 2, what are we looking at here? And I'll make sure that the jury can see this time. What are we looking at here?
So this looks like it's the calculation for the Chevrolet post impact with AOI3 was the impact with the Volkswagen Atlas. So post impact of that.
And so what are you doing here? Is this the same equation that you used to calculate the Volkswagen's speed?
Yes, sir. Same standard speed formula.
And so what exactly are we seeing here when you put 34.88 miles per hour? What does that mean?
So that's the minimum speed that he was traveling outside of that impact in order to cover the distance that it did.
Okay, so at minimum after the impact with the Volkswagen, he would have had to have been traveling 34.88 miles per hour.
That's the amount of speed that was lost. Yes.
Thank you. And then the second thing that we're looking here further down the page is the Chevrolet Silverado area of impact 3 impact speed. This is a different equation than what we've seen before. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and what equation is that used for? What is that equation used for?
So these are typically the linear equations. I can refer to my formula card if you want the name of it or something.
If you need to, ma'am,
I can
please.
grab it. So this is going to be, it's a momentum formula. And it's for types of collisions, it's going to be rear end with your secondary vehicle.
And
Oh, yeah,
so, and
you
so,
need to see
and-
this.
yeah,
Oh, don't display,
if you
okay.
could not display that, ma'am.
Okay,
Sorry, I
so
didn't see it was top.
it just states rear, I was using rear end with the secondary vehicle stopped or versus a fixed object. So basically something that's stationary.
Okay, so what are you using, what's being determined here exactly? Can you explain to the jury in the second equation?
So you're solving for the speed of your primary vehicle And in order to do that, so this is basically like when you have all of yours, like similar to algebra, when you're having all your variables. Some of these are already solved for, some of these are, if they're defined, but you're solving for one side, so you have to kind of format the equation to solve for this number. And that's how you get this. So this is a given equation. But you're solving for the impact speed of your bullet vehicle, your primary vehicle. And in order to do that, you have to account for the vehicle's post-impact speed. And then you have to add in the weight of the secondary vehicle, times it by the speed, the post-impact speed of the secondary vehicle, but then you divide that over the weight of the first vehicle, because you have to account for all the vehicle weights.
So is it fair to say that in this second equation that we see on the page, that what we're doing is we're in essence taking both all the numbers that you figured out so far, the post-impact speeds, and we're using that in this equation to then get the impact speed?
Correct. It's plug and play at this point because I've already solved for all of these variables.
Okay, and what was the impact speed of the Chevrolet Silverado when it struck that Volkswagen?
I calculated it at 54.8 miles per hour.
Turning the page in States Exhibit 104. So we have another equation. Is this a different equation than what we've seen before?
No, standard speed formula, and I'm going to use it I'm going to use all these separate numbers in the combined speed formula, which is likely on the next page.
Okay, and so again, what are we looking at here? What specific area of the crash reconstruction is this map covering?
So again, this is the speed loss, and it's going to be from your AOI 1, your area of impact 1, all the way to your AOI 3. And again, that's just to account for distance covered, any kind of resistance or braking efficiency on the roadway. Again, all of these variables are already defined or calculated for. So I'm plugging in all of these numbers. I'm getting those separate speeds for those separate distances, and I'm going to use all these in conjunction for the combined speed formula.
And so it says it continues on the bottom on the next page. Is there more? Is this the final number on page 4 of State Exhibit number 104 that we were looking for?
Final number for this section for the speed loss between the AOI 1 and AOI 3. Yes.
Okay, and so what was the speed loss between AOI 1 and AOI 3?
For that section, it was 49.62 miles per hour.
So that would tell us that the minimum speed that the Chevy Silverado would have had to have traveled from, or had to have been going at from AOI 1 to AOI 3 would be that 49.62 miles per hour.
Right, it's speed over the course of that distance.
Okay. And then we see another equation here on this page. What exactly are we looking at here?
So this is just plugging in the previously solved for values. That's why it's the combined speed formula. So I'm using the two calculated values that I have for the Chevrolet Silverado from the AOI 1 to AOI 3, and then AOI 3 to final rest. And I'm combining them together here. And that's the speed that it is coming out of the impact. It's post-impact.
So you're using, again, everything that you've already sort of solved for in order to get to this point. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what you're able to determine is that post-impact, area of impact 1, when the Chevy Silverado hit the victim's car, that the Chevy Silverado had to have at a minimum been traveling 73.69 miles per hour in order to cover that entire distance.
That's the speed that it lost. Yeah, it comes to a complete stop, but that's out of the impact.
Okay, and so then what would the next step be?
So again, it's just a repeat process. I did the same thing for the Honda. The only difference was the Honda did strike the concrete barrier, the Jersey wall. And unfortunately, when there's fixed objects like that without any displacement, I can't account for that speed loss. It's only going to increase the speed, but I can't just assume, oh, it adds an extra, 2 miles per hour, 5 miles per hour. I have no idea. If there was displacement, if she hit an object that moved, we've had situations where vehicles hit fire hydrants. Those are fixed objects, but because they were displaced, I can measure the angle and the distance that they were displaced, and I can calculate the speed loss.
And so then what did you have to do here since there was no displacement of any other object?
I can't account for the speed. So her speeds are really minimum. They're not going to be exactly accurate. They're going to be lower.
Okay. And so then using these two, so what are we looking at here? What are the first two?
So I had to calculate from AOI 2 to final rest. I calculated that speed loss. And then from backtracking again from the wall, which is AOI 2 to AOI 1, I calculated that speed loss. and I'm gonna use these in the combined speed formula.
And is that combined speed formula, is that what we're seeing here at the bottom, that 28.93?
Oh, so actually, okay, no, so I didn't do the combined speed because again, I couldn't account for the displacement, so I can't guess, I can't just give you a number, that she lost so much speed because I don't know how much speed the wall took from her, if that makes sense. The wall stopped her, like
Okay.
slowed her down too much and I couldn't measure it.
Okay, so then what was the next step in your calculation?
So from there, I'm calculating the impact speed for the Chevy Silverado. And again, it's just a momentum formula. And because I have a known speed, for the Honda based on the CDR values, you know, if the victim were available to tell me that I was stopped, or yes, I was moving at a low speed, or, just like the driver of the Volkswagen did, he was able to tell me he was at a standstill. Since I have a known speed that I'm taking, I'm using those in the calculation here. Again, plug and play, and I'm solving for the impact speed. So the speed that the vehicle is traveling into the impact of AOI1.
And the speed that the vehicle is traveling, you're talking about that Chevrolet Silverado.
The bullet vehicle, yes, sir.
And what speed did you calculate that vehicle was traveling at when it hit area of impact 1?
92 miles per hour.
And you can take a seat, man. Thank you. So why is it important that what you calculated using the crash map, that it was at 92 miles per hour?
So I use the value from the CDR reports. And as long, there's a validity margin, it's 5%. So as long as it's within that error of margin, it's safe to assume that the calculated values and the reported values from the vehicle are accurate.
And what's that margin of error?
It's the 5%.
Okay, and so you were able to, using the CDR data, you were able to say that the Chevrolet Silverado was traveling at approximately 91 miles per hour at impact.
At a minimum speed of 92 miles per hour.
Okay, well, I'm talking from the CDR.
Oh, from the CDR, it was reported 91 miles per hour. That's what the CDR stored.
And what your math showed was that it was traveling at 92 miles per hour.
92, correct. But the vehicle had larger tires, so the accurate speed, the actual speed, essentially would be higher than the reported speed if the vehicle wasn't recalibrated for those larger tires, which most people don't get the recalibration. Most people in Texas have big trucks and large tires, and they don't do the recalibration.
So why is it important that those are within the margin of error? Can you explain to the jury?
So they validate each other. So the CDR is telling me that it recorded a minimum of 91 miles per hour at impact, but because it has larger tires, the actual speed that the vehicle's traveling should be higher. Based on the roadway evidence that we measured out at the scene, I calculated that the vehicle was traveling at least 92 miles per hour.
So I want to go back to the actual crime scene. Sergeant Martinez, were you able to figure out what the speed limit was in the area where this crash happened?
Yes, sir. So it was a construction zone. There was ample amount of signage to include a digital message board as you're approaching the scene. A bunch of orange warning signs. The speed limit that was displayed out there was 45 miles per hour.
So what you're telling me is that the speed that you calculated the defendant traveling at and his airbag, that it was double the speed limit in that area.
Yes, sir. More than double.
And going back to the crime scene, you were able to speak to all the drivers, including the defendant.
Yes.
Now, while talking to the defendant, I want to know about anything that he could have said, but did you make any observations about the defendant while talking to him?
And
Yes.
And Sergeant Martinez, I'll make my question just maybe a little bit more straightforward. While speaking to the defendant, did you smell anything?
Yes, I noticed, the smell of intoxicants emitting from his breath.
Now, is the vehicle a deadly weapon? Can it be?
Object to speculation.
Overruled.
In this case, I determined that it was, yes, sir.
And what made you make that determination?
Because of the size of the vehicle, the weight of the vehicle, the speed that it was traveling.
And looking at the speed that you were able to calculate, the speed that the airbag module gave, and the speed limit in the area, were you able to determine whether or not the defendant was traveling at a speed that was reasonable and prudent under the circumstances?
Object to speculation.
Any other objection?
And it's leading.
All right, that'll be sustained as deleting.
Was it reasonable to be traveling 92 miles per hour in that area?
Absolutely unreasonable.
And was it prudent under the circumstances that existed at the time?
Object to speculation, and that is a claim-based provenance jury.
Sustained.
Judge, can we have an instruction to disregard that last comment?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you disregard the last question, and if there was an answer, you did disregard the last answer from the witness to the state's question.
We move to the trial.
All right, that would be denied.
Looking at the CDR report from the defendant's vehicle, did he ever use his brakes?
No, sir.
Looking at the roadway evidence that you observed on July 22nd of 2022, did you see any roadway markings that indicated that he used his brakes?
No, sir.
Looking at the roadway markings that you observed on July 22nd of 2022, did the defendant ever take any evasive action?
There was no signs that any effort of evasive action was taken. No, sir.
And would that have shown up on the roadway?
Yes, sir.
And how do you know that it would have shown up on the roadway?
Because at that speed, traveling that speed in that vehicle with that weight, there's what's called crook marks. They're a sudden change of direction, and the vehicle's tires would leave them on the roadway. It shows directionality. And it would also change the angle of approach. So like I said, it's a linear crash. There wasn't more of an offset by 10 degrees. So if there was any kind of evasive action to move out of the way or to avoid the collision, it would absolutely change that angle of approach, and I would be doing some much harder crash math.
I'm gonna point to state's exhibit number, I believe it's 94. Can you step down from below?
That might be that.
Now, using all of the data, all the observations, all the math that you did, and looking at this map, were you able to make a determination as to what happened on July 22nd, 2022 during this crash?
Yes.
Okay, and what determination did you make?
So it appeared that the bullet vehicle, the Chevrolet, was traveling northbound on 281 in the right lane. It appeared that the victim's vehicle was traveling also northbound at a very low speed, a single-digit speed, was slightly veering to the right. Unknown reasons why. I have my own opinions, but slightly veering off to the right shoulder. It appeared that the Chevrolet drove through the Honda based on the amount of intrusion and damage, pushing the Honda off to the right to the barrier wall. Continued northbound while also rolling over for a certain distance. Subsequently struck the Volkswagen Atlas, and he pretty much landed on top of it. So the rear bumper of the Volkswagen Atlas was completely, the frame was completely unaltered or unbent. So it appeared that the Chevrolet landed on top of the Volkswagen, but still propelled it north because this vehicle was still traveling at a high rate of speed northbound until all the vehicles finally came to a stop.
We have seen them. Now, on July 22nd of 2022, did you make a determination as to who was driving the Chevy Silverado?
Yes, the defendant, Mr. Castro.
And if you can point to Mr. Castro and identify him by an item of clothing.
Gentleman sitting right there in the white shirt and gray blazer.
And let the record reflect that the witness has identified the defendant. Did you arrest Mr. Castro that night?
I did not,
Why not?
because I needed to conduct a thorough investigation.
And after conducting your thorough investigation, after doing all the crash math, after taking all the data, after doing all the work that you did here, what determination did you make?
I basically determined that he was the cause of the crash, that he disregarded a substantial risk, by traveling the speed that he did, by taking no evasive action, no implementation of braking. There was a clear line of sight for over half a mile. All of the vehicles that were out there were basically at a standstill. And there were no other vehicles traveling that speed who got into a crash. And in my opinion, he drove through two cars. His actions caused the death of an innocent victim.
Pass the witness.
Defense.
Thank you, Judge. Sergeant, just a few questions for you.
Yes, sir.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Sergeant, can you hear me better now? You can hear me anyway, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, so I've just got a couple of questions. I want to go right back to the beginning.
Okay.
Okay, right. So, so you were on duty that night as part of your role as TID traffic investigation detail?
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure about the timings, but were you at another fatality downtown, did you say?
Yes, it was downtown.
So there was already one death that night. that
Yes,
you
sir.
were investigating. You had a busy night.
I wasn't the handling investigator on that first fatality. It was Detective Orta.
Okay. And
I was assisting at the scene.
so you assisted him and then he assisted you later, that sort of thing,
Yes, sir.
right? Okay, and that was when you got the call about this accident?
Yes.
And you said that, well, we'll talk about it in a minute, but you said there was another primary crash to do with this accident.
Yes, there was a wrong way driver crash on 281. And that crash, so the wrong way driver was coming southbound in the northbound lanes of 281, in the left lane, which would have been their right lane. So a vehicle traveling northbound on 281 in the left lane, they basically had a head-on collision, and it caused a rotation in the vehicle, which is typical with head-on collisions, a rotation that blocked from Jersey wall to Jersey wall. So eventually, the highway's coming to an end. There's no shoulders, and there's warning signs leading up to that, explaining.
Yes.
Can we have a look? Can we identify, Sergeant, well, can we identify anywhere on here where that happened? Is there any way we could do that, do you think?
That's not going to be on the diagram. That's well past the
Yes.
overhead sign,
So the overhead sign this is on the highway here, so it's going to be further up here.
farther north. Yes, sir.
How far do you reckon it is from the sign, do you think, to say further north on, this is 281,
I would be guessing
right, okay, but it was further north of here,
farther north of the overhead sign. Yes, sir.
and it would be on a off ramp.
Yes, so the highway comes to an end. It forces you off the highway.
So, right, because that's right, because there was construction, right? So
The highway's closed. The highway's essentially closed, and it's an exit ramp to get off the highway.
And we've heard testimony, it's changed since then, right?
Mhm,
They finished the construction, but at this point, further north, the highway closed and everything was exiting.
Yes.
Right, okay, thank you. And so what happened? So you call that a primary, why'd you call that a primary? You said, I think that's what you said, was that right? You said primary crash?
Well, when the officer called to advise, he was explaining that they were out at that crash scene, that first crash scene. And that's when the officers were essentially already on scene.
Yeah.
They heard the subsequent crash, so the crash involving these three vehicles, and they basically were able to run back to that crash scene.
Yeah, but I want to, so I'm interested in what the phrase you used. Why is it called a primary? I wrote it down, you wrote primary crash.
I'm not labeling it any certain way. So there was just a crash that happened, so a preceding crash. And then, so a first crash, and then later, after, traffic was at a standstill, that's when the second crash occurred.
Right, okay, fair enough. And so I just wanted to make sure that you're not using it as like a term of art. It's a technical phrase that you use. So it's a preceding or a first crash.
Yeah, a crash that happened prior to this crash.
All right, fair enough. And so that happened, and you were dealing with, and then this accident happened, right?
Yeah, so we weren't notified of the wrong way driver crash because there weren't any injuries. My unit at the time, TID, we only went out to serious bodily injury or fatality crashes. So that wrong way driver crash wouldn't have been a crash that we were needed at.
And has that changed since 2022?
I can't speak for that. I'm no longer at the unit.
No longer here, but it's possible that TID go out to wrong way drivers now.
Our general manuals required that we're notified of them. When I was at the unit, we only went out if there was serious injury or death.
Right, okay, but it might change recently. And when you say general manual, that's the San Antonio Police General Manual.
Correct. That's our policies and procedures for the department.
Policies have, and I'm sorry, Sergeant, I didn't mean to talk over you. Policies and procedures have a number.
Yes,
And do you remember do you remember the specific number for the one we're talking about now?
it would be the crash investigation policy. I'd be guessing at the number.
707?
So I was gonna say 700.
I think it's 707, and I think that's been marked as, that's fine. I'm gonna share that. Is that what we're talking about there?
Yes,
And because you're a patrol sergeant now, right?
correct.
So I'm gonna leave that with you for a second, then I'll ask you questions. But back in the time, back then in 2022, you were a traffic investigation specialist, right?
Traffic investigator.
And so you agree with me that one of the responsibilities of, and according to the policy, right? So now maybe they would have to call TID for a wrong way driver, but back then they didn't necessarily unless there was an injury involved or death.
The policy at the time when I was at traffic investigation is that the patrol officer would notify our unit of a wrong way driver crash.
Oh, did they notify you of that crash?
They did not.
So they didn't notify you of the wrong way driver crash?
No.
All right, but okay, but you'd agree with me that the officers at the scene, and I know you weren't at the scene, right? According to your policy, had a responsibility under action to be taken, right?
From watching their body camera, yes.
And what I mean by that is they've got a duty, and I can approach again, I'm sorry, I should stay there. They've got a duty, if you look under subsection 4 or the policy, you got it there, responding to crashes. That folks at a crash site, if that's what you'd call it, have got a responsibility to notify and warn using their vehicles and flares and stuff.
Yes, sir.
To prevent another accident from happening.
Yes, for safety
For
purposes.
safety purposes, and you'd agree with me, thank you, Sergeant, that the officers on the scene, and I know you weren't one of them, they didn't do that.
They did have their lights activated and they were blocking the roadway.
They were
The roadway was already blocked.
The roadway was already blocked, right?
Yes,
And so, knowing what you know now, you didn't know at the time, the roadway was blocked, but it stayed blocked and traffic kept building up. And
It
this
was-
accident happened,
backpedaling.
yeah, this accident happened in that line of traffic.
Correct.
Right, okay, and so. I wanted to ask you about your observations at the scene. And again, I just your observations, not what was said, right? Okay. And a moment ago, you testified that you, I can't remember what the prosecutor asked you, what the question it was, that you said that you noticed the smell of intoxicants on his breath, as in Mr. Castro's.
Correct.
Now, do you remember speaking to Sergeant Johnson at the scene that night?
I do.
And do you remember that? And that was while you're at the scene. So when I say at the scene, when you finally made the scene and you had been speaking to Mr. Castro, and I don't want to know what you spoke to him about, right? So you'd made the scene and you were there with other officers,
Yes.
right? And then how many TID folks were there with you?
At that scene, it was me and two other detectives, Detective Orta and Detective Doyle, and then Sergeant Johnson.
And that was about 6 a.m. ish. Give or take.
When we arrived, yeah, around between 5:30 and 6.
So you had an opportunity to make some observations about Mr. Castro, right? Just observations.
Okay.
And you said that you noticed the smell of intoxicants on his breath.
Yes.
Do you remember speaking to Sergeant Johnson about that?
I do recall informing him, yes.
And do you remember telling Sergeant Johnson that you didn't smell intoxicants on his breath being Mr. Castro's?
I don't recall that.
If I showed you your body camera, would that refresh your memory?
Yeah, that's fine.
If my brief on
Yes.
outside the presence of jury.
Yes. All right, if you all will give us 5 minutes, remember my previous instructions? You'll play the DVD, please? You'll play the DVD for her to see?
You want us to put it up there, Judge, or do you want to?
Oh, she can, if you want to step down,
I don't know.
Yeah. and then if y'all can get her to the
I think, Judge, it should be just a clip of it.
All right, for the jury.
All right, everyone, please be seated. Defense, it's been your witness.
Sergeant, we just took a slight break, so we could refresh your memory with your body camera, right?
Yes,
And is your memory refreshed?
yes,
When, so you'd agree with me that you had a conversation with Sergeant Johnson, who's your supervisor,
I did.
and he asked you if you smelt anything on Mr. Castro's breath.
He did.
And do you remember what your answer to him was at the time?
It sounds like I say nope.
Thank you. And I think, I've got no further questions, Judge. Thank you, pass the witness.
Any further questions?
Was that after you spoke with Sergeant Johnson, was that the only time you spoke with the defendant?
No, I recontacted the defendant several times.
Nothing from the state.
All right, is this witness excused?
No objection.
All right, the rule has been invoked. You're not allowed to discuss your testimony with anyone until this case is concluded. The only persons you're allowed to speak to are attorneys for the state and the defense.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, you may step down
Thank you.
and please leave the exhibits.
Yes.
Thank you. State, call your next witness.
Judge, I believe that witness in transit for the last witness, it would be the medical examiner.
Okay.
I'm trying to get that information currently.
All
I
right,
think you just take a small break. He was here earlier, but he's got a nickel.
all right. So are you all okay with waiting for the next witness to arrive? So what I'll do then is I'll have you all wait in the jury room and we'll come get you as soon as the witness arrives. Remember my previous instructions. All right, everyone, please be seated. State, call your next witness.
Yes, the state called, Dr. Garrett Phillips.
All right, can you raise your right hand for me, please? Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give will be the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
All right, you can lower your hand, and if you'll state your name for the record.
Garrett Phillips.
State.
Yes, Your Honor, sorry. Grabbing the mic for the court reporter. Dr. Phillips, can you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hi, I'm Dr. Garrett Phillips.
And sir, can you just, I guess, briefly go over your educational background to become a medical examiner?
After 4 years of undergraduate training at Baylor College of at Baylor University, I completed 4 years of medical school at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, 4 years of anatomic and clinical pathology residency training, also at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, and a year of forensic pathology fellowship training here at the Bexar County Medical Examiner's Office.
And what about your experience as a medical examiner? How long have you been a medical examiner?
Following my training, I worked at the Harris County Institute of Forensic Sciences from 2015 to 2021 and returned here at the end of 2021, where I have worked since as a staff.
And I guess generally, how many autopsies have you performed?
It's more than 2,000 at this point.
And let's go to why you came in here today. Did you perform can you tell the jury what an external inspection report is?
Yes, when we examine a decedent at the medical examiner's office, we're going to generate a report. Depending on the type of examination that the decedent receives, that may be an autopsy report or a report of the external inspection. An external inspection is an examination that does not include an internal examination of the body, as in a full autopsy. Only the external surfaces of the body are examined.
And in any one case, let's just talk about this particular case. External inspection report that you performed on Alexandra Shea West Sidebar.
Correct.
And what day did you perform this external inspection report?
The examination was July 24th, 2022.
July 24th, 2022. And did you have any other accompanying reports or documents or records that you reviewed, including this external inspection?
Yes, whenever a case is reported to us, a report will additionally be generated by our investigative team. So I reviewed the investigative report that they generated, as well as medical records pertaining to the decedent.
And so you use medical records and then this external report that you made, you combine that to determine the cause of death. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And when this individual came into to the ME's office, how did she arrive?
She was transported from the hospital. There are basically two major ways that individuals will come to the medical examiner's office. The first is if they are dead, as we will say, at the scene, then we will attend the scene of death and the body will be transported directly from there to the medical examiner's office. If someone does not die at the scene, but is instead transported to the hospital for treatment, and then subsequently dies during their hospitalization, they will be brought from the hospital.
And in this particular incident with Ms. Shebert, did she pass away at the hospital?
She did.
And then she was transported to the medical examiner's office. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you tell me, as her body arrived there, in what state did it arrive?
The body arrived from the hospital nude. There was some evidence of medical intervention that was present. There was also some evidence of tissue and organ recovery, as the decedent was an organ donor.
And so in this particular case, did she donate her organs?
Yes, that's correct.
And so I'm not going to show pictures of this, but is there a a stitching on the body showing where they extracted organs from her body?
Yes, a midline incision is made from which the organs are taken.
Now, that didn't have any effect on your determination of the cause of death,
It did not.
and might be a dumb question, but I sort of have to ask it. Her organs weren't harvested when she was still alive.
No, those organ procurements occur only after death has been pronounced.
And when you reviewed the hospital records or medical records of the Siebert, and also looked at the external body of this individual, did you see any evidence of injury?
I did.
And can you please explain to the jury those evidence of injury?
So upon external examination of the body, we do see injuries that are consistent with blunt force. There are several different types of blunt force injuries that you can have. You can have abrasions, which is a scraping of the most superficial regions of the skin. You can have contusions, which is simply to say bruising. You can have lacerations, which are tears of the skin as a result of blunt force as opposed to sharp force. These aren't cut, these are torn. And finally, you can have fractures of the bones. And so there was evidence of that on the external examination, as well as clinically documented my review of the medical records.
And did your observations that you made of Ms. Siebert's body coincide with the match up to the medical records that you also reviewed?
They did.
And can you tell the jury where were these injuries located at on her body?
The superficial injuries that I described, such as the abrasions and contusions, were somewhat diffusely distributed over the surface of the body. However, the internal injuries documented in the medical record and the most significant injuries that I could identify at autopsy involved the head.
And was there any, through the medical records or your observations, any problem with the neck or airway or any other extremities of her body?
There were no injuries documented internally to the neck. And again, we did not perform an autopsy examination.
And then the injuries to the head, can you describe those to the jury, please?
Those injuries prominently included lacerations, both frontal to the front of the scalp, as well as occipital or to the back of the scalp. Most significantly involving the occipital or the back of the scalp laceration, there was palpable fractured bone in the depths of that laceration, and cerebral parenchyma was visible exuding from that laceration. Cerebral parenchyma is, simply spoken, the tissues of the brain.
And did you determine if these injuries caused her death?
Yes,
And did they cause her death?
yes.
You want to, may I approach?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked previously as state exhibit number 77, and also state exhibit number 108. And now you've had time to review those. Do you recognize those photos?
I do.
And who are those photos of?
Those are photos of the decedent referenced in this autopsy, or sorry, external examination report.
Also, I see in one of them, it looks like there's some numbers on there, and it mentions Bear County Examiner. Does that number match the report that you generated in this case?
It does. That number is 2022-2054.
At this time, Your Honor, the state would be asking to enter state exhibit number 77 and 108.
Any objection?
Senator.
No objection, Judge.
All right, States Exhibit 77 and 108 are admitted without objection.
Thank you. May I publish, Your Honor?
Yes.
First, I'm going to put up state exhibit number 108, and can you please describe to the jury what they are seeing?
This is an image taken of the posterior or back portion of the decedent's head. This is a photograph of the laceration that I mentioned, where fractured bone was palpable and the tissue of the brain or the cerebral parenchyma was visible extruding from the laceration.
I'll show you what's been marked, say exhibit number 77. Can you tell the jury what they're seeing here?
This demonstrates a couple of findings. There is an avulsing, which is to say an undermined and lifted away laceration of the frontal scalp over the left eyebrow. The bone in this region was, however, probably intact. In addition, you can see, depending on the lighting of your screen, some of the ecchymosis or bleeding into the soft tissues of the face around the eyes. That's periorbital ecchymosis.
And as I asked you previously about the number on this this picture, 2022-2054. Is that for identification purposes for y'all's report and the individual that you performed the external inspection on?
That's correct. Not everyone who comes to the medical examiner's office is identified. Sometimes we do not necessarily know the identity of the deceased individual, but an accession number or a case number is assigned to every individual, and that number remains with the decedent, with the report, with the photographs, regardless of the identification status as that progresses.
So in cases like this, for identification purposes, that's why we have these numbers. Is that correct?
For our identification, yes, to link all materials associated with the case.
Thank you. And you also, the ME's office also, I guess, tests the individual's blood. And in this case, can you describe to the jury how you went about testing that, or how they went about testing that?
In a case like this, when someone has been in the hospital for some time, obviously the blood that is in their system may not be reflective of the blood that was present at the time of the incident. What we will do is request that any so-called first blood will accompany the decedent from the hospital if there is any blood left over from the point in time when the decedent arrived. In this case, first blood was available, and that was transported with the decedent to our office, and that was the specimen that was tested.
And what were the results of that testing?
Ketamine was identified in the decedent's blood.
What does ketamine?
It's a sedative or anesthetic that is often used in intubation for injured individuals.
So if this individual was obviously in a crash or something that caused these injuries, and then medical intervention was used upon her, would that be a medication or medicine that they would administer?
Yes, this was therapeutically administered. It's important to note, obviously, that the first blood is, of course, a very slight misnomer. It's the first blood from the hospital, but any pre-hospital treatment that someone has received, that could be the origin of such a drug.
And again, can you tell the jury that what did you determine the cause of death of Ms. Siebert?
The cause of death was blunt force injuries of the head.
After witness, John.
Right, defense.
Judge. Good evening, Dr. Phillips. Just have a couple of questions for you. There are different types of manner of deaths that you notate on reports.
Yes, that's correct.
One of them would be manner of death homicide,
Correct.
and one of them can also be accident.
Correct.
And in this case, you determined that the manner of death was an accident.
That's correct.
No further questions, Your Honor. You pass the witness.
Do you know what type of accident it was?
When I classify a manner as an accident, that's a medical legal determination that is standard for our field. So when I say accident, that's what I mean. I'm not sure I completely have addressed your question, perhaps.
Well, you don't know the legal terms that may be associated with that.
Manner of death has nothing to do with any sort of legal indictment or legal terminology. It is purely a medical legal determination that has nothing to do with moral, ethical, or legal culpability.
Thank you. We'll pass the witness, Your Honor.
No further questions, Judge.
All right, is this witness excused or subject for recall?
Yes, must.
Excuse me.
All right, the rule has been invoked. You're not allowed to discuss your testimony with anyone except for attorneys for the state or the defense until the conclusion of this case. You're excused. Thank you. And we can go off record. All right, ladies and gentlemen, We're gonna come back on Monday. And we'll be here at 9. And we'll continue with this case at that time. I do have a docket in the morning, but I've already had my court coordinator to move it for later. So we'll take this case up at 9. Remember what I said? You are not allowed to think about this case outside of this courtroom. So you are not allowed to view anything. If you happen to see anything, turn it off. If anyone wants to discuss anything with you about this case, let them know you're not allowed to discuss it with them. Sometimes people will say, hey, are you on a jury? You can say, yes, I'm on jury duty. That's it. You're not to discuss anything about this case. You're not allowed to do any investigation. Everything that you need to know about this case is to come from inside this courtroom. Does everyone understand? And when you're allowed to start to discuss this case outside the confines of this courtroom, I will let you know. Does everyone understand? All right, so I will see you all on Monday at 9. Yes.